occasions, but I think it bears repeating. And that is the issue of the function of education. Because often I think we confuse, and when I speak of we, I'm particularly speaking of us as Africans, and this includes those of us who are so-called African Americans and Africans from other parts of the world. We often confuse education with what is given by colleges and what is given by universities, and we confuse good education with what is given by certain colleges and universities. So we see schools, say like Harvard or Yale or this one, or others as giving us a sound education or good education. And we're used to measuring education in terms of admissions requirements and things of this type, or the kinds of jobs students are permitted to get after they graduate, the kinds of facilities the schools offer, and in the type of faculty they may have. You know, there are various kinds of criteria we use, so-called accreditation, and all of these things as a basis for determining what a good education is. And while these elements may be part of a good education, they are certainly not the sum total of a so-called good education. We have to recognize that every culture educates its youth, no matter how so-called primitive, no matter in what kind of so-called level of political, social, economic, technological development. Every culture prepares its children to assume the necessary roles to maintain that culture, to maintain the survival of that culture, and to advance the interests of that culture. So whether it is teaching someone to shoot a bow and arrow, or to hunt, or to plant seed in the ground, or to take care of some very routine kind of chores, all the way up to the kind of preparation you're getting today, you're still engaged in what we call education. It is very, very important that we, as African people of African descent, keep in mind then that the ultimate function of education is to advance the interests of a people, of a culture, to protect that interest, ultimately to protect the very biological survival of a people, and to maintain their quality of life and improve their quality of life. This is the ultimate criterion against which education must be measured. It should not be measured in terms of the school you go to, but in terms of ultimately to what degree is it going to help to maintain my group, advance my group, protect the integrity of my group, not in terms of the courses offered or the kinds of teachers that are there. And you have to always then ask that question: in what way is this education ultimately going to protect the interests of my group and the survival of my group? So the first function of education is not just to get you jobs. You're saying, because many of us kind of think that way, you know, we figure that we're going, and we're often told that and motivated in those terms by our parents and other people. Go to college so you can get a job, or get a good job. Go to college so you can raise your status. Go to college, you know, so you can somehow make yourself outstanding in some form or fashion. And too often then we see college as this place where we either maintain our class status or advance our class status, and where we then pursue our own personal interests. And often we forget then about the group interests. Colleges certainly are places for people to prepare for jobs, obviously. But we recognize, though, that is a secondary function, essentially, of colleges and of education in general. The jobs that people are prepared for or prepared to hold are the jobs that are necessary to maintain the culture that they live in. And even a primitive society has roles and often is stratified in terms of roles and role relations, and trains people to fit certain kind of roles. So there's nothing new in the concept that one is educated in order to play a certain role. But when you look at the whole interrelationship of the roles or jobs, as you may call it, their overall function still is to maintain the integrity of the society, to protect that society and advance that society's interests. And in a sense, the jobs are defined in terms of that, not the other way around. It doesn't go backwards. It goes the other way around. What do we need? What kind of roles do we need? What kind of people do we need to advance the interests of our society and culture? When you go to school just for jobs, you leave out the very vital question. In what way is this job I'm going to get going to contribute to the advancement of my people, to the protection of their interests? You see? And it is in this light that you begin to look at education. And you'll note then that education in this country and in Eurocentric countries is principally concerned, of course, with the advancement of Eurocentric society, which lives off of the subordination of black people. And when you're getting educated in these institutions, you're getting educated in that context, believe it or not. And unless you're conscious of this process of education, you will become a part of the problem, not a solution to the problem, but a part of the problem. Many of us think then that these degrees that we get here and the diplomas somehow are some kind of magic shield or some kind of insurance against hard times. The ultimate insurance against any hard times, of course, is the strength of your people. The ultimate guarantee of individual freedom is the strength and power of your people. There are some people here who may not be so familiar with recent history and think perhaps they may be here because they went to the right high school or came from the right family or, read the right books, made the right score on the SATs and so forth. But if you checked as little back as 20 years ago, you would see that even that wouldn't have gotten you here. In fact, it wouldn't have gotten you out in any of the institutions. Blacks have been been parts of the right families and read the right books for a long time. And in many instances, with all of that, they didn't even, the sign was, don't bother to apply. You just couldn't get into the institutions, period. It is not your own talents and your own personal characteristics and your own academic preparation and your own family background that is responsible for getting you here. It is the collective activity of black people who went out and marched and picketed and went to jail and protested and did all the kinds of things that was necessary to get you here in order that you might then have what you call a personal choice, that you may pick and choose your profession. But remember that privilege to pick and choose, the privilege to be here, ultimately has to be protected by black people in general, not by your talents, not by your own cleverness or smartness. In the end, it's going to be the willingness of black people as a collective group to protect this kind of choice. You are not expressing individualism at all. You can only express that in terms of the power of your people. If your people are weak and unable to protect your individual interests, then you have no real individual interests or individual privileges. And this we ought to forget. And many people who are not familiar with our recent history, and I'm running into more and more people like this, who are not even familiar with history 10 or 15 years ago, who are coming into these places believing that this is the way it has always been, and that they are where they are because of some great personality that they have, or some great mental ability that they have. And then when this kind of person graduates, they assume that they don't owe any other black person anything, that they've made it on their own. It was through their talent and through whatever they did, and now they don't owe anyone else. And you'll find these same individuals ready to give away their monies, resources, and brains to other people and other ethnic groups out of this kind of foolishness and out of this mistaken delusion about individualism that this society lays on us. Individualism is only possible within the strength of group. There are some people who are foolish enough to think that this degree will protect them. I was somewhat It used it to a degree some years back when this young man was killed over here on 114th Street. Some of you may recall that, over in the park there. He was shot, I believe, by the policeman, and then his brother was arrested, and they went through some changes. And what I found remarkable to hear people keep referring to, this kid here was smart. He went to, I think, some private school, and he was accepted at Cornell, like somehow this should have stopped the bullet. Somehow his education should have prevented him from getting shot like any other black person. And yet I should have been surprised, because there are a lot of people who believe somehow that attaining these degrees is somehow going to provide them with some kind of protection that other black people are not going to have. And that is a delusion. When these people come down upon you, when they get into their racist hysteria, they're not going to stop and ask you if you have a degree from Hunter. They're going to see your face and shoot you in the streets. And that's going to be it. As a matter of fact, the smarter ones will be shot first. In any really repressive system, it is the intellectuals and the educated one and the so-called intelligentsia that is most repressed, because often it represents the group that may have enough resources and other kinds of things to provide leadership for revolution and leadership to overthrow the repressive governments. So when I was being raised in Mississippi, you knew you were in trouble with the white man when he told you that you were a smart nigga. You're in serious trouble then. I've often said that black people have been taught to be dumb, because they learned to be dumb is to be safer. Because as soon as these people often saw that you could think as well or better than they, and you knew what was going on and so forth, they immediately perceived the threat, and they immediately saw to it that you were repressed. So the idea that getting these degrees is going to protect you in some sort of way, exclude you from the kinds of terrors that other people may have to suffer, is a delusion. As a matter of fact, it may expose you first and foremost. The education of Jews in Germany did not keep them out of the gas chambers. This is another thing, too, that I think many of us find difficult. We just don't believe our good white folks will exterminate us. It's very difficult for us to believe that. And I could imagine for a period of time the Jews in Germany just couldn't believe that good Germans could exterminate them either. They were such cultured people. Germany was a leader in science and technology and literature. You look at the great names in literature and technology and chemistry. When you had to get a degree in science some years ago, you automatically studied German and scientific German, because if you wanted to read the latest work in theoretical development and so forth, you had to read the German journals, because this is where the advance in science and technology and so forth was. And so some people believe that these cultured people with that literature and that great Wagnerian traditions and all these other traditions would not be capable of doing what they did. Do not be deceived by this kind of thing, ladies and gentlemen. It is quite possible. Even if you don't think it's possible, you have to prepare for the what if. I've often mentioned to people about the Martin Luther King dream, and he lays out the dream. It's a beautiful dream, I've remarked. But then that dream is also based on an if. If they will love us, if they will accept us. And there are a lot of propositional statements in there. If the economy is good and all of these kind of things, then little black boys and white boys and girls may hold hands together. But we recognize that this is a propositional statement that's being made here. But you also have to ask the other question, what if it doesn't work this way? You see? What if the dream does not come true? Another problem we have often, we believe in the American mythology of progress. We as blacks have bought that idea. We bought this idea because America has advanced to some degree over time, and many of us just automatically assume that things have got to get better. That's sort of the American way of thinking, isn't it? We got it today, it's got to be better tomorrow. There's no law that guarantees you in any way that things have got to get better, ladies and gentlemen. There's no universal rule that says life has to get better. that says race relationships have to get better simply because you were in slavery some years ago and now you have a so-called relative degree of freedom. The idea then that you can never go back into slavery, or the idea that you can never re-experience Reconstruction and the other kinds of things, to think that this is not going to occur. There is no law in the universe that tells you that this cannot be the case. There's also this belief in the invulnerability of the white man, and the belief that somehow he's going to always protect his interests and be able to advance his interests, and therefore as long as we hang in with this guy in protecting himself, coincidentally he'll protect us. There is no law and rule in the universe that says the white man is going to rule forever. As a matter of fact, if you look at history, it's going to be very clear that the civilizations built by the white man shall perish as the others have perished. So even in the good times, wise people prepare for bad possibilities. Even if we were to hold hands with little white boys and white girls, and that was all this great Martin Luther King dream, that still does not say that we should not prepare for the other possibilities, because they can occur. Recognize that all of these dreams are often very much based on economic systems, and when economic changes come about, these dreams turn into nightmares. And recognize, let's look at an example here. Look at New York City and the problem we're having with education in New York City. This problem we're having, particularly in terms of African Americans, is very much connected with the economic situation in New York City. Ask yourself the question, what if we educated 100% of black and Hispanic children in New York City? They read well, they could pass all the civil service exams and the whole bit. But what would happen if the economy of New York City did not expand to accommodate all of these great graduates and plus the other people who are also graduating at the same time? You see, we assume simply because we keep getting more degrees that there will be automatically more jobs out there. But that is not necessarily the case. You can educate a vast number of black and Hispanic children. You still have not solved the problem that there may not be a market out there to absorb these kids when they get out there. And you will see then some more furious confrontations taking place of a prepared group of people, an educated group of people who now cannot find jobs. And if you think the other people are unwise and unhip to this, you got another thought coming. So consequently, it becomes wiser for them to pretend that we are having tremendous problems in education, where you chop off over 50 or 60 or 70% of black and Hispanic children early in school, and you can say they don't work because they're not educated, and therefore everybody gets off the hook. But you can see the miseducation of these children is in part related also to the economic structure. It means that the economic structure has to expand at the same time you increase the number of graduates from secondary and from collegiate institutions. If the economy does not expand, the dreams of Martin Luther King will not come true, because the economy cannot finance these dreams, and these dreams have to be financed by something. And so we have to recognize then what is going on in reality here. You have to ask yourself then, in so many years of education, to what degree are we as people and African people in a position to really protect our biological interests? And ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the biological interests of black people, the biological survival of black people, is in question. I'm not talking about quality of life. I'm talking about life itself. As I've often said, when we look at this situation, the military situation, the situation of pollution and so forth, what African nation, if the Caucasians decided tomorrow that they wanted to re-enslave African people, what African nation or group of people could militarily defend the interests of black people? With the kind of space weaponry we have floating around in the atmosphere, what African nation could defend militarily its own people? the people in the world. In what way has all of the college education and the degrees in engineering and so forth we have gotten advanced our ability to defend ourselves militarily and in other ways? Let me look, though, quickly at something else, and let's try to context education in terms of this. I often talk about what I call constants. A child reaches a major milestone in its development when it can recognize constancies in the world. That is, when it recognizes how the world stays basically and essentially the same in many important areas, even though it appears to be changing. And even though in terms of its sense organs, it is changing. If you were to look at the images of this room on my retina or cornea, the room certainly would not have its rectangular shape, because it would actually be shaped very oddly. This door, perhaps, as I move, each time I move, the door would change shapes. Even though perceptively, as far as I see it, it still stays the same. But actually, in terms of the image that's projected on my retina, it is constantly changing with every movement I make. And not only is it changing relative to me, but its shape is changing. And if I were to go on just what is thrust on my retina, I would have to lean sideways or all kinds of ways trying to get through this door. But what happens is my brain corrects the image that is projected on my retina. And it maintains a constant image of this door, despite the myriad of changes that may be projected on the retina of my eye. So it permits me then, despite where I stand in this room, how I move, to move very efficiently through that door, because my brain is maintaining a constancy of perception despite some obvious changes as projected on the retina. And it's very important that we keep this in mind, because if you don't maintain a perception of the constants, then you will be deceived by every change in the world. You know, someone says the French have a statement that goes, the more things change, the more they remain the same. You know, and often many things change so that they can remain the same. And often we have been deceived by the changes that have happened, let us say, in this country. We look at slavery time, we look at Reconstruction, and we break history up into these various parts. And often we compare what opportunities we have available to us today against when we were in slavery and against when we were segregated and against us. And it looks like we've come through tremendous changes. And we get the idea that the world has changed drastically. And of course, this feeds into the mythology of progress. That if it's changed this much since that time, it's got to get better further on down the road. But then you must recognize that there are certain constants that are still behind these apparent changes. And I'll mention some of the constants here. There could be others, of course, you can come through. When you talk about the European, you must recognize that the European is only about 10% of the world's population. And that's a very important concept to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. It sounds like a coincidental statement, but it's one that's important because a great deal of European psychology and orientation to the world is based on their minority status. We as Africans and people of African descent are a part of the world's larger majorities, not minorities. The European is a small group of people. It is a minority group of people. And that minority, its minority status has shaped its psychology and its orientation to the world, both consciously and unconsciously. And often then, for this minority to maintain its control over the world, it must, of necessity, maintain an enormous military power. And this is one of the constants that it's going to seek to maintain no matter how many white boys and girls you hold hands with. No matter how many white people you sleep with and marry and all of this kind of stuff. This is a constant. Military power. An overwhelming military power. As a matter of fact, it was a part of that military power that had you here today. And you can see today the greatest problem in this country and in Russia and in other European countries involves money spent for military outlays. A vast consumption of the country's wealth and resources goes into military resources. And despite the fact that you tell these people you have enough weapons now to kill each individual 700 times over, they still rob everybody to build up this military power. Because they recognize, being such a small group, that the only real advantage they have over these other large majorities is an overwhelming military presence. And now you can go to all of these schools and everywhere you want to go, but that's a constant. And that constant has been there since you first met the white man, and as a matter of fact, it has not been diminished since. And the intention is that it will always be that way. Even when you join the military, you'll still be a part of that whole situation. It'll be set there. That's one of the constants that maintains that. The other constant, of course, is economic power. Maintaining economic control of the world. That control was being established when we first met this man in Africa. It has grown since that time, and it is still maintaining itself at this time. You can get as many jobs as you want to on Wall Street. You can work for IBM. You can work for all the rest. But the constant is that they're going to still be owned by Europeans. That they're going to still be controlled by Europeans. And that ownership and control is going to be used to manipulate the psychology of non-European people, to maintain the subordination and servitude of European people. You think now because you have a choice, you can choose computer engineering and you can choose this and that somehow you have it over your great-grandparents who were slaves? Let's look at that constant. Of course, not every black slave was a field hand. We had roles there too. Not every black slave was a house servant. You had carpenters, you had skilled craftsmen, you had people who were up to date, and I'm speaking of slaves now, in terms of crafts and skills, who worked in mills and factories and all of the other kinds of things. And yet, the ultimate thing was they worked for the benefit of their masters. They turned their profits over to their masters. That relationship has not changed one whit. The idea that because you got a degree in computer engineering or whatever you may call it, that you somehow have changed from your great-grandparent who might have been an iron worker and a skilled one, that this has changed is only an illusion. Because as your great-grandparents worked to enrich his master, so when you get out of this school, you're going to work to enrich your own masters. Oh, they're not going to hold a whip over you. They're not going to, be as brutal perhaps, but the same essential relationship is going to be there. And therefore, it is the intention. As a matter of fact, the integration of our people into these jobs is still being done to maintain a grip on the economic system. So what do? As I often tell my students, you are being educated to put a black face on white power. I was reading something the other day. We were talking about conditioning, and in my psych class the other day, and how you use conditioning to manipulate desires and so forth in people, and to try to induce people to buy various items. And of course it talked about the Coke campaign, how Coke would start off its campaign with Bill Cosby's show, how it would be identified with intimate groups and so forth, associations, how Michael Jackson, I believe, would be used as such, how Michael Jordan, the basketball player, would be used and shown drinking Coke and so forth, and how a black advertising agency would be hired to project this image to black people. It had Fernando Valenzuela for the Hispanics. It had reggae music for the Caribbeans, about very cherry Coke. Someone told me that cherry in the Caribbean also has to do with being high, doesn't it? Someone ever heard that? So Coke is very cherry. And yet you see here then an association of a product with people's culture and with their backgrounds and with their values as a way of manipulating the mind, manipulating their desires and creating desires in them and increasing their consumption and using then black agencies and Hispanic agencies and Asian agencies and hiring black vice presidents. And you know, it always amuses me when you read about the vice presidents of large corporations and you always get to this black person who's the vice president of special markets. Of course, you know that he is the black man on staff whose special job it is to show these people how black needs and moods can be manipulated to earn greater money for the white company. So in the end, while you may point out that now you have black vice presidents and you have black advertising agencies and how far we've come, when you get down to the very bottom dollar, it is still the old game of extracting resources and money and everything else out of black people and using them to enrich the economic power and resources of Europeans. And of course the Europeans found out that it works better when you put a black face in the position to do this. So ultimately he maintains his economic control by projecting and educating black people to do it. It's the same old game as neocolonialism. I don't think there's no coincidence that you have neocolonialism occurring pretty much in parallel to so-called integrationism or assimilationism in America. The same kind of game is going on, putting black faces on white power, because when you look under that black face, you'll still see economic control and economic manipulation taking place. I was looking the other day, sometime back, I was reading in the New York Times about how many scholarships were available to black South Africans. In fact, there was more money available to black South Africans than there were black South Africans to take the money. And you say, well, now why is this? I mean, they're looking for them. Well, why wasn't this money available 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 30 years ago? Why is it being available now? Of course, the obvious situation is here that where the Europeans see that they will lose political power in South Africa, what they want to do, of course, is educate its next leadership generation. And of course, knowing how we eat up white degrees, we're going to, when these people go and get these degrees out of these Eurocentric institutions, we're going to respect them so highly, we're going to put them right into office, and they're going to bring their educated values and orientations right with them and help to maintain and repress the group in the interest of their European tutors and mentors. So now the money is being available. You read colonial history, you'll see often as the Europeans turned to loose the so-called colonies, they established schools and institutions so that they could educate the leadership class. And of course we can see what kind of problems that involves. And a similar game goes on within this particular culture. By the way, you say, well, you know, we have to play that kind of game. Well, if I have to play that kind of game and eat, I'm going to do it. But there's no assurance that you're even going to eat. If you had read last month, in fact, still this month, Black Enterprise magazine, you would have seen the lead piece in that magazine dealing with, what is it? How to survive, something like how do you survive the cutbacks in industry? And there's a whole article on there advising blacks how you get severance pay from these companies as they cut back. As a matter of fact, Graves says in that piece that 500,000 middle management jobs have been knocked out since the early 80s, ladies and gentlemen. That there is a severe cutback. He's speaking very clearly in terms of his own class interest. He says the black corporate class, whatever kind of class that is strictly endangered. Then he goes on to say that also means danger for the black people as a race. But of course he deals it with this class first. And so what he's concerned with is, he goes on to say further in that article that there's concern whether there will be any black who's going to head a Fortune 500 company by the year 2000. And he mentions the idea that there are actually fewer black college graduates today than some years back. And the problem, he says, is how are we going to protect the interests of these black college graduates when the ones that are currently in industry are now on their way out, and so there'll be no one there to help pull them in at all. And so the idea that the degree is going to assure you some kind of job is very, very questionable, period. because there's a shrinking in terms of American economic might and the growth of the American economy. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, as I've often said, civil rights laws, affirmative action laws are no guarantee at all for you getting any kind of job. Too many of us have been raised to think that laws will protect our interest. Laws are not going to protect your interest one whit. Laws can only protect, and laws don't protect anything, as a matter of fact. It's people who protect interest. And the day that the establishment decides that it is not going to enforce the law, then the law is of no account. We saw that in Reconstruction. When Washington decided that it would no longer support the Reconstruction laws and so forth, then the whole thing collapsed. It took 100 years to get over that, to get back halfway where we were during Reconstruction. We look at the Reagan administration today. It just decides that it is not going to enforce the rules. The rules are on the books. But when it decides and sends out a signal that it's not going to enforce the rules, then nothing happens. And believe this, ladies and gentlemen, if it ever gets to a point where there's a choice between the European feeding his child and feeding yours, no law in the world is going to make this man feed your child first. None whatsoever. So the ultimate thing is you cannot have faith in laws and things of this nature. You ultimately have to have power, real power. And to a good extent, you see, education ultimately has to be about that. Preparing a people and setting a people up to have real power so that they can protect their biological and other interests in times of stress. You see? And if, as I said earlier, if it doesn't do that, then it is not a sound education. I don't care how well you speak, what college you went to, who taught you as professors. If it doesn't add up ultimately to the protection of your interests, then it is not ultimately a sound education. So we see that as a constant. The economic constant has been there. The technological constant is there. That is, again, in order to maintain its power, the Europeans must maintain a technological edge. And you can see what kind of worry the Caucasians now are having as Japan trims their edge in technology. In fact, I often chide my people, you say you want an equal education to white children, you're out of luck already. If you make them equal to white children, you're still behind, because they're behind the Japanese. So you get an equal education with them, you're still in trouble, because that's not going to protect you. These people are trying to see to their own survival, economically and socially. So you have to set your goals now even higher than that. You're going to have to be smarter than the whites, and you're going to have to be smarter than the Japanese. You see? And to talk about equal education is dumb in a time like this, when the people you want to be equal to are themselves unequal and backwards. And yet many of us are still looking at these institutions that are showing us every day how they're falling behind in the world. We still see them as providing us with a so-called adequate education. You have to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to compete with not only white folk, you've got to compete with many other ethnic groups in this world. And consequently, you've got to prepare your mind to compete with these other groups. Like it is, you've got to do it. This is the reality of the situation here. And dealing in terms of equality with the group that's already sinking is a real issue. But this group recognizes that it must maintain this technological advantage. And no matter, so even when it hires you, and even if you're a technological genius, it's going to hire you to do what? To maintain this technological edge. I was reading this piece in the Times yesterday. How many of you read the piece on superconductivity? Read the New York Times on Tuesday. It's good. It's the science section. You should read it, if no other day, read it on Tuesday. Good pieces in psychology, education, and science. And yesterday he was dealing with superconductivity, which represents a tremendous change in technology. And there's a heated rivalry between nations over who is going to build these metals that they can be virtually non-resistant to an electrical current at room temperature. It has vital implications. But as I read through the article, of course, I see all of these Woos and Lees and Hungs and all these other kind of people at where Houston University, Cal, so forth and so forth. What is going on here? You see a situation where these people now have not become so-called liberal lately and started hiring a lot of Asians because they love them, but they are hiring them because if the hiring them will keep them in the running technologically, then they will hire them for that purpose. You see, and so some of you will get hired because of your brain, but the ultimate constant is going to remain the same, to maintain the technological edge over African peoples and to maintain dominance over African people. So even as you're integrated into the system because of your great brilliance, still recognize ultimately the game is that your brilliance will be used against your own people. So now we're going to educate these Koreans and we're going to educate these Asians for what? To maintain the technological edge over whom? The Asians themselves. You see, so even the hiring of black people and African people, the integration of black people into the economic so-called system and so forth is still there to maintain the economic constant. And this ultimate outcome will be to maintain the dominance of Europeans. And so when you're getting educated, then you must do that. Now, I'll show later on here how you see this kind of thing is set up. Note that the plan is this. See, and some of us, we've gotten through, and some of us are fed into individualism, you see, by saying, well, I got here back then of hard work, and my parents were down to the school every day to see that I was in school and so forth, and if all the other black families would do this, no, that's a mythology. That's total mythology. We educate a few of you to justify the mythology of individualism. You become the prime example that's going to be projected before the black people say, well, see, through hard work and all for how this Negro made it. And you didn't make it because you didn't have it. Nonsense. Purely nonsense. But that is a part of the game too. And when you're being educated, watch that because this is the setup, you see. And if you don't watch it, you'll come to believe it yourself. And I run into students already who have this belief, you see. But this system is set up in such a way that it will educate a few. It will brain drain a few, but the vast majority will get shuttled out of the system at the lower end. But the shuttling out will say it is the result of some kind of deficiency within their personality. And when the people believe that, then they will believe more deeply in individualism. When, as I showed you earlier, the system at its restricted economic state could not afford to educate large numbers of them anyway. But it gets away with this kind of excuse, you see. And so there's a reversal here that is used, and therefore it's in the interest of the nation in order to maintain its economic power to educate a few and to keep the rest out. So don't be used. The other constant that must be kept, and that is the constant of definition. I can't get across this idea, I don't know why, I try to get it across how important it is to have the power to define. When you let another people have the power of definition, you're letting them have the power of creation. You see in the mythological Bible, the world being created in terms of images and words. Let there be light, let there be this, and there was this. It doesn't matter whether it was true or not. The essence of the idea is that definition brings about reality and brings into reality. The ability to define is to a good extent the ability to say what is real and unreal. And when you let another people define reality for you, then they determine what reality is. And consequently, when we as a people have given up our power to define, then we have really given up our power to defend our interests as a people. The other day we were doing a lesson in social psychology. I wish I could bring a textbook in here just to show you how these books are set up just to do you in. And the more you read, the more they do you in. That's why I say often blacks are educated into ignorance. They're made ignorant by the very education. And the audacity with which these books will do it to you, they just sit it right up there and say, look, this is the way we manipulate you. This is the way we control you. It's right there, very clearly. You go into social psychology class and it talks about persuasive communications. You see, it talks about establishing norms and how you get people to react and behave in certain kinds of ways. Why do people conform? And one of the reasons it gave the other day, well, we conform particularly in ambiguous situations, because if we don't know what's going on in the situation, we look at other people to see what they are doing, and how many of us have been in that kind of situation, and then we follow their example, and we conform then to their behavior, particularly if it looks like their behavior is the right behavior, brings about the right results. And it's a very interesting statement, because it appears it's simple, but on a certain level, it's a very deep kind of statement. Because of me, and after they made this initial idea, then they talked about several experiments showing how this worked out, you see. How you could deliberately have one or two people who would define the situation differently and make people not believe their own eyes. I mean, where people were looking at physical things, two lines, and one line was obviously longer than the other, but because one or two people in the group said, no, they're the same length, many of them reached the same conclusion, showing the power of the influence of the group. And when I looked at this concept of definition, looking at other people for definition, it reminded me of something here. Often the people we look for to define the situation are the people who brought on the initial confusion in the first place, you see. And it's very interesting, because when you want to manipulate people, and some of you do this subconsciously, and some do it consciously, one of the first things you do is to confuse them. Like, we've done that among each other a little bit, right? You confuse them a little bit, upset them, they don't know quite what to do, and then what do? I got the answer. I'll get you out of your misery. So therefore, the person who first puts you in your misery also becomes your authority for what? Getting you out. And of course, when they get you out, they're going to get you out in terms that will advance their own interests. And now we talk about the confusion, the lack of definition, that we have the robbing black people of history, the robbing of black people of culture, the robbing of black people of a basis for reality based on their own experience and so forth. You see? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, a typical thing happens. We end up believing the people who lie to us most. And watching, you see this in personal behavior as well as group behavior. The very group that has lied to you, has rewritten your history, has enslaved your parents, has eaten you up economically in every other kind of way, is the very group you go to validate reality. And to validate what is real. And to validate what is true. And you're foolish enough to think that they are the ultimate validators of what is real. And you're foolish enough to think that they are going to give you a definition that's going to get you out of your misery. And that's why we rush to their schools and rush to sit under their feet and rush to, and where the greatest liars of all sit, that's the places we want to go first. And where the highest liars are, those are the degrees we're most proud of. And you write these papers and they make you quote these liars. Oh, you don't have enough references here. Fill the liars. But then if you go and get your own people or somebody, you can't have to leave them because they're not accepted by the establishment or something like that. And the references that are related to your own, you're scared to put them in because, the liars don't recognize those things. You see? And you'll see this reversal going on all the time. You see? Where the confuser also becomes the authority. In fact, they confuse you first so that they can become the authority. You see? And it's set up and built up that way. And consequently, you will see us there going back to our original confusers. People who are defining things. And when people define things, and ultimately when you define, you end up serving the definition. You end up becoming the definition. When a white man calls a black man boy, he's not only calling him a name, he is creating a boy. The very calling of the name is a part of the creation. Because when he calls him boy, he relates to him as a boy. And as he relates to him as a boy, he begins to create a boy. And as the black man relates to the white man in terms of that definition, he habituates to that definition and ultimately comes to serve that definition. So consequently, you cannot let, and yet we have not removed since slavery time and the power of the European to define reality. And when you read these books, if you're not careful, and yet you spend most of your time watching in this college, what? Learning what? Their definitions, memorizing them, committing them to your head and to your heart. And you wonder why you can't get out of the trouble that you're in. You see, you can't have to get out of it. You got to be able to step outside of the whole thing and have a whole nother foundation for looking at what's going on. You can't let your master give you the definition and then give you the critique of the definition, because they're still with what? They're still within the same thing. So whether you are learning to critically analyze literature, you're still critically analyzing it within the context of a Eurocentric tradition. So you still have not escaped. You see, ultimately you have to step out of the whole critical thing and the whole other thing and use a whole other foundation. Otherwise, you're going to be defined in a way that adds to. That has not changed. Definition has not changed. And to a degree, the more you educate a black man in these institutions, and the more black people accept these definitions, the more they will stay within the confines of the definition. And therefore, there's no escape through education. The other thing, domain of discourse. What we call the domain of discourse. By that we mean, who chooses what it is important to talk about? What is news? That which comes on 7 o'clock in the evening? What is news? You ever thought about that? Who defines news? That's the domain of discourse. You got a group of guys and whoever that sits back every evening and say, this is news. Okay? And a lot of people, and they define it what we write in our news. The New York Times is the newspaper of record. Right? What comes on CBS, ABC is what? News. If it doesn't come on there, then it's not what? It's not news. This is a control of the domain of discourse. What do you talk about when you come to these classrooms? Many people come to these colleges and they assume that what is in the college catalog is worth learning. They assume that it must be worth learning because of what? Because it's there. If it weren't worth learning, why would they put it in? You know? And then they also make the opposite assumption that if it's not in there, what? It's not worth learning. This is a control of discourse, control of the domain of discourse, where people now set what is important to talk about, what is important to learn. You see, when you open the book, I talk to my students in psychology. Every time I talk about something that's not in the book, their eyes glaze over. They put their brain into neutral and wait until I get back to psychology. You know, I tell them I'm always talking psychology. In fact, when I'm talking to you about something that's not in the book, I'm talking about that is the most important thing I'm talking about that day, at that moment. However, because you have accepted this book as the definer of what psychology is, you see, you're going to see what I talk about as being unimportant. And of course, what I'm talking about is how that psychology can be used for our advancement. I see students even get uncomfortable when I get at it. I talk to mixed classes, and you can see the blacks and the whites all are twisting and turning. Because, they're suffering anxiety. Isn't it amazing, though? You can talk about the Holocaust, you can talk about all of this all day, no problems. But if you talk about slavery, if you bring up anything to do with black people, often both black and white students are terribly uncomfortable. They feel as if now they're being imposed upon. But what good is psychology to you if you can't use it in your own interest to understand yourself? What kind of course is it that you take that is of no value to you as a people and ultimately is not of any value to you as an individual? And how can it be of the value to you if you don't discuss and look at how it can be of value to you, you see? Whether it makes you uncomfortable or not. But often, you see, what we've done then is let these other people, and when you go to these schools often, you let the other people determine what it is that's important to talk about, and consequently then, they are certainly going to list all of the courses and knowledge and information that is relevant to their own advancement and relevant to maintaining their own dominance. And when you make the assumption then that if it's not in the book, it is not worth learning, you're going to see everything that's related to you, you're going to perceive as not worth learning. And therefore, the more educated you become, the more really ignorant you will become of things that are really important to your own advancement. And that is one of the reasons why many educated black people are of little value to the advancement of the black group and of the black race. As a matter of fact, one of the best ways of making them no good is to educate them. You see? Because they just can't figure out how to use what they know for the interests of black people. And it's a pitiful thing. We have fewer black businesses today than we had years back. Yet we got more black degrees, MBAs, PhDs in economics, business administration degrees. What does that say, ladies and gentlemen? That these degrees are not designed for you to have any control over the economic system. The more of them you get, the less economic control you're going to have over yourself. Educating you right out of economic control. Because the course is not only defined by its subject matter, it is defined by the issues and problems that a people face. Economic is not just the discussing curves and formats and prices and macroeconomics and macroeconomics. It must ultimately get down to economic issues and problems. And the thing is, when you look at black economic and African economic issues and problems, those issues and problems are not addressed in the general economics courses and in the standard economics courses. And you can sit in there till you get 2 PhDs, you'll never get around to yourself. And when you come out of there, you'll only be prepared to work for the other people. So the other constant we mentioned, the constant is for the European, no matter how well educated we are, to ultimately be servants. And the education itself is an education into servitude. It is one that is still designed to maintain us in a relative position. Even though we're doing different jobs, we may be making more money, we may eat better, but the relationship is the same. And this is often because of what I call the control of the domain of discourse. That has not changed. What else has not changed? Information. The control of information has not changed much. I've just mentioned the books you read, the newspapers we read, the TV, the radio. Where is our information coming from? Where do we get the bulk of our information? That is still in the hands of Europeans. I think recently here the United States stopped supporting a UN agency because so-called third world countries were demanding that the reporters and so forth from the European countries report the news and report information out of these countries in a different sort of way, in a way that was more representative of reality. But rather than to do this, the United States and other European countries literally stopped their support for the agency and ultimately pushed the African man who headed that agency out of the job, even though they gave other kinds of excuses, because these people recognize that the control of information is a control of consciousness. That has not changed. And often entering into these institutions is entering into a world whose information is still under the control of other people. And of course the other constant is the degradation of things African, which has been that since the beginning. I've often said you cannot be a slave and an African at the same time. You cannot be a servant and an African at the same time. And therefore you must be de-Africanized if you're to serve your master very well. And you'll see that process going on. And therefore things African are going to be put on a lower scale than things European. And you'll see then, of course, education is about that. Look at what we have out here. Look at the kind of styles we have. The kind of curls that people are wearing, all this kind of thing. The plastic surgery that is going on. And stuff like this. Look at the silliness and craziness of it. I've often said, and I say again and again, in order for us to be in the position we're in, we have to be out of our minds. We have to be crazy. And I mean that literally. The essence of black psychology today, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is a political necessity for black people to be out of their minds. This is where you have to start if you're going to deal with reality in terms of black people. We cannot be in our right minds. And I mean this literally, I'm not being rhetorical. We cannot be in our right minds and be in this position of servitude. You cannot do it. The 90% of the world that is non-European could not be in the state it's in unless it's out of its mind. It's a necessity that we be out of our minds, off center, off balance, destabilized. Why is it that every third world country is almost destabilized? It can never get on top of itself economically, militarily, socially. Every time it looks like it make a little progress, there's a coup or there's this and that. Because the ultimate thing in international politics is the destabilization of your enemies. If you destabilize the government, you ultimately destabilize the institutions of the society. If you destabilize the institutions of the society, you destabilize individuals. What happens politically in the broad culture represents itself as psychopathology in the individual himself. Individual madness is a reflection of societal madness ultimately, because societal madness works itself through ultimately to the individual. And so a destabilization of African countries and nations ultimately equals a destabilization of the individual African personality itself. And if destabilization of African nations leads to the maintenance of European power, then the destabilization of the African mind is a part of that whole process, and we have to face that. We've got to be out of our mind. Now, what goes on here? Here's an African man, he's oppressed by a European. And what does the European tell him? Well, I'm oppressing you because you got nappy hair. You know, I'm oppressing you because you got a big nose, and you got big feet, and you got long arms, you know, got big lips, and so forth. And if you didn't have all these things, I wouldn't oppress you. You know, this is often the way the victim thinks. Oh, I wouldn't be in this condition if I wasn't black. You know, you did that to me because I'm black. Black has nothing to do with it at all. No, your lips ain't going to hurt you. Your hair's not going to hurt you. There's no pain in that at all. But you can hear the way people state it semantically. Listen to the way we state it. This happened because I'm black. You see? You notice that? There's a psychology in that statement. No, nothing has happened to you because you're black. It has happened to you because there are a crazy people that attacks people and destroys them because they are different. And it is European madness, not blackness, not big nose, not nappy hair, but the Negro who comes to believe that it is blackness then is going to bleach the skin, you see. And this is a part of the reversal too, you see. So that you see the problem as a need to reorganize your own physiognomy as a way of solving the problem. So therefore, the whiter, if I can shrink my nose and, you know, shrink my lips and lighten my skin and so forth, then I might be, in other words, if I can identify with the victimizer, and if I and the victimizer are one, then of course I will not suffer. And consequently, you have many of us then trying to identify, not only physically, we try to identify psychologically. When you look at me as a man. Don't see me as black. You know, you're standing right there. How can I not see you as black? But we want to be denatured, you know. No, you want to say, see me as I am and still treat me right. Don't denature me and then I can only treat you right after I refuse to see you as for what you are. That's crazy. It's a crazy kind of world. And we often go with that, you know, and when you fall in that philosophy, then you denature things African, and you only get accepted to the degree that you can denature your own African self, which is a bogus acceptance anyway. You see, because that's not going to ultimately win the case. And what I'm trying to say then with all of these constants is that it is these constants, no matter what all the other changes you see, the scholarships you get and all these other things you get into these schools, those constants will stay there. Military edge, economic edge, technological edge, control over definition, control over the domain of discourse, control over information, the degradation of things African will stay there because they are necessary to maintain European power, and anything then that takes place within this context ultimately must take place to maintain it. Education does not escape this process. One other thing I want to say, that when you have a situation of this kind, everything must be reversed in relationship to our people. In other words, we must be made backwards. And education is not going to get you out of it now. Simply, I often say we have to be dumb as people. A lot of people assume, dumb does mean you haven't been to school. No, you can be dumb and be very well educated. As a matter of fact, being very well educated is a process often of becoming dumb. You see? Because often when you're educated out of your mind, you see, educated out of your values and educated out of your heritage and educated outside of yourself and educated out of reality, often you're more dumb than the people who haven't gone to school. Because often they face the reality of what's going on every day and they see it face to face. But the educated person often protects himself from that reality and covers it over with what we call in the psychological defense of intellectualization. Depriving things of real emotional value by describing them in clinical terms and using large words and euphemisms that we've so learned so carefully in these schools as a way of escaping dealing with what things the way they really are. In order for this man to rule the world, ladies and gentlemen, he can only rule the world through deception, through lies. That's the only way possible for a small group of people to rule a mass group of people, ladies and gentlemen. Through lies. That's the only way possible for a small group of people to rule a mass group of people, ladies and gentlemen. Through fooling them, through deception. That's the only way it can be done. And look at the reversal that you see in the world today. Why is it that the people who have the world's wealth under their swords are hungry and are seen as poverty-stricken? And the ones who have no wealth are seen as rich and powerful. Why is it that the Japanese who inhabit a rock in the middle of nowhere with no resources, seen as economically powerful, and yet our countries which have the world's resources are seen as poor and dependent? There's a reversal there in some kind of way. Isn't that sort of backwards? Yeah, it's a very backwards situation. Why are these people called rich and we are called poor? But it has to be projected that way. Why are these nations that depend upon African nations for their very way of life and their very technology seen and somehow as being independent, and the nations upon which they depend are seen as dependent nations? Why are the people who are the majorities in the world called minorities, and the people who are minorities seen as majorities? When you look at it, you see, ladies and gentlemen, it's only possible if things are turned around the other way. And therefore, the black personality must be a backwards personality regardless of education level. It cannot be one that's straight with itself. And you will see in relationship to every institution in this society and other societies, the results of dealing with those institutions will almost always be the opposite of the results that whites get from the same institutions. You send your children to school and sit beside white children, sit in front of a white teacher, they come out not reading and the white child comes out reading. What gives here? They go to the school, come out ignorant, if they come out at all, and the white child gets through and gets over. And I've often told you, you look at it, they'll always be backwards. Education will make you dumb, ill-prepared, unable to advance your interests. Economics will keep you poor. No matter how much economics we take, we're still dealing with what? Poverty. So the economic system is designed to maintain the poverty of black people. Religion, I often say, is designed to send you to hell. Yeah. It's going to take you to hell, and believe me, it's going to take you to hell. The family institution is not going to solve your family problems. You're hollering about teenage pregnancy, you're hollering about the breakup of the black family, but still you're adhering to that Eurocentric model of what a family should be. And even though it's not saving the Europeans, it is also, and is doing far more damage to us as a people, but we still hold on to it. The criminal justice system must dole out what? Injustice? How can this system dole out justice, real justice to black people, and help, and at the same time maintain the dominance of white people over black people? Don't you recognize that that's a contradiction? And yet we are shocked every time some unjust thing happens to our people, or some cop shoots our people down. I told people years ago that when you decide to clear up crime in the black community, you're going to have to fight the cops first. I'm telling you. And believe me, it's going to happen that way. Because their system is based upon the criminality and the criminalizing of the black community. The correction system is based upon a plentiful supply of black males to be processed through it. Too many people make that living off of it. The correction industry, the corrections situation is what? It is what do we call it? Not an institution, it is an industry in which black males are the raw materials, so that everybody gets a piece of him as he's processed through the system. The cop on the block gets his piece and his reason for being. The judge, the court ought to get their piece. The stenographer, everybody eats him up there, including his lawyer. He's going to still send him up. And then the guards up in these little towns where hardly anything up there but white people live off of they make their living in these prisons. They get their piece out of it. And then the social workers and psychologists who are not going to do a damn thing when it's through get their piece out of it. And when they come out, they're more criminal than they were when they went in. And they're processed to what? Again, you see, if you start them out about 13 or 14, you can process them for about 30 years. They finally get out of it when they hit about 40, 45. They're burned out by that time. But you work them, you're working on the next generation, you see. And with so many people, and look at all the people that feed in on it. I'm just only talking about the officers, but look at the vendors, the food people who sell food to the prisons, Con Ed who puts electricity in there, the construction people, and all the other people whose livelihood depends upon the criminalization of black men. And you think these people are going to give you justice? It can't be possible. How can you receive justice and equality if that justice and equality is going to truly make you equal to the white man? Because when you become equal to the white man, you're going to become more than the white man. And so then, you're going to see this reversal taking place. And this reversal is going to take place not only on the institutional level, but it's ultimately going to become a part of the black personality. We're going to know more about other people's history than we know about our own. We're going to know more about other people's psychology and so forth than we know about our own. We're going to know more about other people's economics than we know about our own. We can't solve the economic situation in Harlem, but yet we're ready to go and solve an economic situation for somebody who really doesn't need you. We're going to know all of this, but no less about ourselves. Reversed in our orientation. But not only are we going to be reversed in the sense of knowledge, but we will be reversed in emotions and feelings. Ultimately, in this system, we must come to love the things that destroy us and hate the things that will advance our interests. We're going to find the things that work against us irresistibly attractive. In fact, those things that destroy us are going to give us the greatest feelings of euphoria. And we're going to accept the definition. If it feels good, then go for it. In fact, we're going to define things in terms of their feeling. Of course, this is one reason why you rob people of intellect. You rob people of common sense. You rob people of the ability to control their behavior through reason. And once you rob them of that, they have nothing left but feelings and emotions. Of course, we call it spirituality. You know, we brag about how feeling we are. Certainly we are to a degree, but also recognize another accretion to that feeling is a deliberate built-in emotional nature. Because one of the best ways to manipulate people is through their emotions and through feelings, and any advertiser will tell you that. When you look at some of these ads, you will recognize that they make no logical sense whatsoever. None. When you really listen to them carefully and look at what they're saying, Coke is it. Coke is what? You know, get the feeling, catch the wave. What are you talking about here? Ambiguous feelings and images projected, you see, so that people can respond in terms of emotions and feelings rather than in terms of intellect. As I indicated to somebody, in order for people to be manipulated, they have to be robbed of their common sense first. And they have to be robbed of the ability to control their behavior through their common sense and through their rationality, so that they can only be open emotionally and through feelings. And then they will define things and their relationship to things in terms of feelings. So if it makes me feel good, then it's good for me. Okay. So we'll find one other thing that happens here. And look what happens here. What relationship is there between smoking and being a man? No, it's not a logical relationship between that at all. But of course, when you make a Marlboro man and a man riding a horse, you know, the whole image is created there. And people make connections, emotional, hedonistic connections between the two. What relationship is there between a woman being free and smoking? You've come a long way, baby. Virginia Slims. Back in 1845, and Mr. Jones caught Miss Jones smoking, you know, and now she can smoke, you know, that's the essence of freedom. Totally illogical, but many people responded to it, didn't they? They got into it because the smoking of the cigarette now is what? Symbolic of what? Of freedom. But note really what is happening here. You are free to become what? Enslaved to a new habit. And you're free to become exposed to what? Cancer. And therefore, to expose oneself to cancer and to become enslaved to a habit that's very difficult to get rid of is what? Symbolic and the essence of freedom. Know the person when they get a nicotine fit. If I don't have my cigarette, I'm going to die. But you're going to die when you get it. But note the reversal, though. The reversal is, I feel good and I feel most alive when I'm consuming that which what? Kills me. And you will see this psychology is going to run through almost everything we do. I hate to read. I get headaches. I get sleepy. I fall asleep over the book. Hate to think. I hate to work. And all of these kinds of things. You see, because what? They don't make me feel good. It's ultimately, as I pointed out before, it's going to even get into your love relationship and lead to the point where you're going to always choose the wrong mate. Because you're going to choose them too in terms of feelings. When I'm near you, chills run up my spine. I just lose my mind. You know, look at the Psalms, you know, and watch it. Describe what? Love as what? Feelings. Just total feelings. I think about you all the time. My life is not without is without meaning, without you, baby. I feel secure. This is an adult talking, you know. Take my heart. Treat me gently. You know, all this other kind of stuff. You know, what's going on here? But as I often tell people, if you think love means that you can't do nothing but think about this person all the time, you become obsessed with them all the time, when you're with them, chills run up your spine and all of this. But I said, what difference is that between the love for crack? Same thing. Crack, heroin. When you get a crack habit, it's the same game, isn't it? When you get it, chills run up your spine. You're out of your mind. When you get hooked into it, what? You can't think about nothing but crack. I'll do anything for you, baby. I'll kill, I'll rob for you. You do the same thing for crack. You do the same thing for sneakers. Notice the kids. Same thing for leather coats. Because what? They make you feel good. You think about them all the time, you know. Makes you feel like a man. All of these kind of things. This is the kind of game that's played on people you want to manipulate. You rob them of intellect and you rob them of reason and you lead them then with feelings and hedonistic orientations toward the world and you watch them choose always backwards. The black man is not free. He's only free to do the wrong thing. That's the only freedom that you have. But the system is designed in such a way that when you choose the wrong thing, it's going to feel good to you. You see? So consequently, you're going to feel good while you're being destroyed at the same time. And this is the reversal of the system. And notice when I said earlier about this class I was in, as long as I teach them these Eurocentric concepts in the psychology class, the class is very comfortable. No problems, everybody's hooked in. As soon as I talk about how this applies to blackness, as soon as I move from the rat in the box, and how that rat is black people, twisting and turning, total discomfort. When I told my class yesterday, I said, I'm going to do a lecture over here at Hunter tomorrow. What are you going to talk about? Third world economics? And these are black students, making a joke out of it. And that was the implication here, it's a way of saying, we're uncomfortable when you talk about the third world. We think it's unimportant that you keep raising this issue in the class. You see, we think this is what you're talking about. When you relate this to us, it's unimportant. It makes us unhappy that you bring this issue up. Even though I tell them at the end of the class, you are not going to be comfortable in here. You're going to be anxiety-ridden in here. Because if you're in a social science course and you're not upset, you are being lied to. The day you're sitting in social science courses, given the state that this world is in, and you're not upset and confronting yourself, you're being lied to. You should be most uncomfortable in these courses because they should force you to look and deal with reality, ladies and gentlemen. And so consequently then, what do we have? People who want to go to courses that make them do what? Feel good. That they're comfortable in. That they enjoy. You see? That they find not boring. You see? And often what they define as boring, courses that force them to think and force them to analyze and force them to slow down in their impulsive kind of thinking. Because you see, a lot of us are perseverative in our thinking, Sometimes I'm talking in class and I mention one word and often some student goes with it, it's all out of the context. Because we are often knee-jerked. We are prepared to respond to words and symbols and just run off with it and forget the whole logic and context of what is being discussed and dealt with, you see. So in this instance, then, we have to deal with it. Now, wrap it up here then. The situation then is, we've discussed in our class yesterday also conditioning. And it's very interesting because it's so simple. Because it says conditioning, the essence of operating conditioning is that behavior is controlled by its consequences. Very simple statement, but very, very powerful. Mommy. So therefore, and the whole idea is, if a particular behavior brings satisfaction and brings, rewards, it is that behavior is more likely to be repeated and to increase in frequency. If it, of course, is to bring dissatisfaction and pain and so forth, it is less likely to be. A very simple statement, but a lot of people overlook the simplicity of the statement because it's often these very simple concepts which are really the foundations. You see, the real things in the world cannot be complicated, ladies and gentlemen. I often tell people, the day that I see a religion using a book to get to its God, it's already alienated. Yeah. Yeah, when you got to learn how to read in order to know your God, you're already out of business. Note that the founders of your religion didn't have the Bible. They didn't read any Bibles. Jesus wasn't reading the Bible. And Peter and all those these things came 70 years and 100 years later. Why they even seem as supremely religious when you're now with the book is seen as less than they are? How can they be supremely related to God without a Bible, without a book, and you with the book is seen as disconnected? How can God relate to man in a very basic sort of way if he requires that they read first? Come on. The very essence and principles of the relationship of God must be gotten to much more simply than reading theology and getting degrees in theology, ladies and gentlemen. What a trick God must have played on us if he required that we read and get degrees in theology in order to be next to him. That's crazy. It must mean then that the very basic understanding of God and the very basic connection of God must be essentially simple and straightforward. But of course you need experts and authorities to do what? Complicate it so that then you have to come to them to get to Jesus. Let me pray for you, and then you'll feel better. Why can't I pray for myself? You know, the man of God. You mean I'm not of God? How did you come to be the man of God? I'm not the man of God. You see? But this is the part of the whole hierarchy. This is the part of the hell thing, you know, that these hierarchical things are going to send you to. Now, what are we talking about here then in terms of the conditioning situation here? The control of consequences. The essence of power, then, is the ability to control the consequences of other people's actions. Right? That's the essence of it. If I can determine what is going to happen to you as a result of the way you behave, then that is power. And if then your behavior is to a significant degree controlled by the consequences it brings, and if I can control the consequences it brings, then ultimately I control what? I control your behavior. And if I control your behavior over time, that it becomes habitual. And if it becomes habitual, it becomes a part of your character. It becomes a part of your personality. And so in essence, the ability to control the consequences of somebody else's behavior to a good degree ultimately means the ability to create their personality and to create those people as individuals. And when you see that rat in the Skinner box, that rat is being created. It's unlike any other rat. It's not the original rat. When you pick a rat out and put it in that box and control the conditions under which it lives, control when it's going to get fed, when it's going to get watered, when it's going to get food, and all the other kinds of things, that rat will learn various behaviors that reflect those conditions. We not only live under certain conditions, the conditions live in us. And when you look at this situation, as I tell and this is what I'm teaching my students, that makes them uncomfortable, you know. And I'm saying, look at your situation. The ghetto is a nigger box. What do we mean there? It is a set of conditions designed to create niggers out of Africans. And of course you will see who controls your water, who controls the food, who controls the jobs, who controls information, and you'll see, and who manipulates all of these things in terms of behavior. And says, well, you have to write this way, you got to write this sentence this way, you got to talk this way, dress this way, walk this way, think this way, all of this if you are to get this job. And then when you get this job, you are to behave this way, so and so and so and so, if you are to get paid. And you can see then a creation of personality and behavior as a result of someone controlling consequences of behavior. So ultimately, you see, if you're going to create yourself, you're going to have to also get what? The ability to control the consequences of your own actions. And no matter how well educated you are, if that education does not lead to the end point of getting control of the consequences of our own behavior, it means ultimately then, no matter how well educated we are not going to be able to create ourselves as African people. Thank you very much.
That you say something very, even though what you were ending up on was what we need, very specifically to these people who will be leaving, hopefully, Hunter College one day. What specifically should they be looking to do with their lives, which will be in the interest of their people?
Okay, there are many things, of course, that need to be done. Of course, the real question as you move through this institution is to see how what you're gaining here can be applied, as I implied earlier, to the advancement of our people and to protection of our people. And to recognize that we as an African people have to build a nation, and we have to build institutions that I've indicated earlier that will protect our interests. It is also very necessary that we build an economy and build an economic system and network as people. It's not enough that you get jobs in these places. It's not enough that, as I've indicated earlier, that you be accepted through affirmative action programs or other programs, because ultimately that still leaves the economy in the hands of another people. Remember what I said as I ended. The inability to determine the consequences of your behavior ultimately means the inability to become self-creating and self-controlling. And if we are to become self-controlling, then we'll have to move ourselves, we have to get out from under the economic, military, and cultural dominance of Europeans. So we must gear our education toward that. Remember one thing too, that, as I said earlier, being educated in these areas is not going to guarantee you any real job security, any other security. The best security ultimately is to have control of your own economic and social circumstances. Now, I've seen many of us being educated in an Afrocentric way. That's very important. However, do not forget that we need an economic system, because even if you educate your children very, very well, and you have no economy in which to hire them and use them to do research for you, then in a sense it's not going to do any good. You just have a bunch of frustrated Afrocentric people working for IBM. And unless you have an economic control, ultimately then you're not going to have control of yourself. And we have to look at this situation because we've neglected that. Many of us are traumatized by money. Many of us are confused by Marxism and that game. It has paralyzed many of us. We read about socialism. We've been traumatized by capitalism, which means, of course, we are caught in between and we don't quite know which way to go. The idea is you must come to terms with money, you must come to terms with economics, and recognize one thing I put forth under other circumstances. If you want to be great, if you want to be free, if you want to gain self-respect, and you want people to respect you the way they respected our forefathers, our Egyptian fathers, our Canadian fathers, and so forth, recognize ultimately, though, that the greatnesses of these civilizations was based on an economic system. And when you talk about how wonderful Egypt was, you don't forget to recognize that that system was supported by an economic system. You just don't build temples and pyramids out of air, and you don't build temples and pyramids by praises to Ra and Osiris and the rest of the gang. You still have to pay people, you still have to feed people, you still have to provision and organize and the whole bit. So in getting your education, you must get an understanding of these principles, and you must put them into action. You must also transform your personality such that you be able to love one another and make a connection with each other. Thank you very much.
Some people can stay. Maybe we can have some questions. I want to make an announcement that
which African country can set their own people? Is it which African country can set their own people, or why is it that no African country can protect their own people?
Either way. I guess you have some comments you want to make on that. Go ahead. I'm willing to listen.
I really don't think that.
You saying, am I asking which specific country? The implication, my implication was that there is not one that can protect the interests of African people in general. I'm not only talking about Africa.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's.
The implication should be why and not which.
Okay, the implication is, of course, that what I was getting at was that the Europe-centric educational systems and other systems are designed to maintain that very situation through education, through economic control, through the control of propaganda and the things that I mentioned earlier when I talked about the constants. Because if these constants are maintained as they are through the miseducation of our people, through the undermining of our economic and political stability, and so forth, then it makes it almost impossible for African nations to defend the interests of their people. Yes, that was the point of my talking about the constants. Essentially, in this context, I'm talking about the miseducation of our people, and that being used to maintain just those circumstances. Mm-hmm. But perhaps you want to make a further comment about that. I guess I'm not quite speaking to your issue. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Okay, based upon what you spoke
Let me just elaborate just a moment on this. I always mention this movie Star Wars, and because particularly the first one, when I talk about, because it gives you an idea And it's interesting that the current United States military system is called Star Wars. You see, and here you see a situation of where now warfare is moving out into space, and where the attacks will come from far out space. And of course, the major drive in economic technology now is to develop some kind of shield against these space weapons and intercontinental. And of course, if you study the whole thing that's going on with Reagan now and Gorbachev and this business of removing missiles out of Europe, you're dealing with the whole issue of how long a nation has to prepare itself, whether it has 30 minutes or 15 minutes to prepare itself against the attack of another nation's missiles. And or when you talk about the neutron bomb, which was prepared specifically for the Third World. And you look then at the nature of African defenses, and when I say African, I'm talking globally. You see that we are exceedingly vulnerable to this kind of attack. I mentioned yesterday in my class how interesting it is that when it comes down to dealing with the fate of the world, it is two men who represent a minority in the world that sits down and decides the biological fate of the world, which is a damn shame. But it also speaks to the reality that the other people in the world have nothing to do with their own fate. And this is a dangerous position for us as African people to be in, and of course for those people to be in. When you're robbed of an economy, you cannot build a defense against these systems. Because when you have even the jet planes and the other kinds of military hardware that you may find in Africa today is hardware that is sold from these countries. And often when they are sold into these countries, they're not sold, of course, as offensive systems. And often they're not sold as defensive systems. Often they are sold as systems which the government is going to use to repress its own population in the interest of the economic demands of the European nations, through the IMF and other countries as well. Often the aid that you get is the aid to train your police so that they can be in a position to repress the local population when it fights against raised prices so that the banks in New York City can be paid back. So when I talk about an economy, then we must recognize that if we're going to have a credible defense against these Europeans, we must have an economy that can afford the kind of military power that is necessary. And we cannot get that economy if we see the end point of our education as working for these people instead of building counter institutions, as working for IBM instead of building an IBM. It's as working for these multinationals instead of building these nationals ourselves and competing toe-to-toe with Europeans. We are going to be defenseless as long as we see the point of education as working for these people, even if we were to be presidents of the Fortune 500 countries. And if education, if the economic education of African people is not an education that motivates us and prepares us to do just that, to go out and actually found companies and found economies that compete directly with the European, then we are being miseducated. And I'm saying, and we are not being educated for that purpose. You see, we are being educated for servitude. And because we are educated for servitude, we therefore will be defenseless against these people. That was the essence of what I was getting at. And the ultimate idea being that you cannot take the education that you're getting here for granted, and you cannot take it as being complete. You must recognize it for what it is, and you're going to have to add to it your own personal research, your own outside research, and everything else in order to make it work for us.
Get the person in a position where all of these things lose their influence over his mind, and then he will have a direct encounter with the isness of the world. and a direct spiritual encounter, you see. And it becomes a spiritual experience, you see. And he doesn't have to attach names to it. He doesn't have to attach doctrines to it, all this other kind of stuff.
Because he has a directness,
Then he
you
can
know,
be
with his
religious.
one self.
Yes,
Definitely.
and spiritual. But you see, theologies block people from those kind
Yeah,
of
within his
experiences.
one self is his spiritual. So when he, finds his one self, he can reach the spiritual elevation a lot, faster without stop and go.
But you
Like
see,
the
the
whole
church cannot let
situation.
you do that if it is to maintain its hierarchical structure. So the very structure of it impels it to impose doctrines and ideologies and blind the individual to a direct experience of God in order to maintain itself, you see, because if you had a direct experience to God, then of course,
Wouldn't need all that.
what do you need the priest for?
That's right. See, that's their whole game. Because by slowly putting Christianity on you and slowly putting all these prophets in the place of truth, right? That puts you in a situation to when they bring you over here, right? You are ready to stop at every little block thinking you want to reach the top when they know the top will you never reach the top because every time you go make that step, they strip a little bit of your
But
identity.
see, often
in
the
process.
originators of the religion do not have all of that stuff. It's the people that come after.
Thank you.
You see,
When you look at many of the originators, you don't see all of this doctrinal stuff, but it's the institution builders that come after, that lay all the rules and rituals.
got a chance to ask them anything?
Yeah, come into 301. We're inviting you. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's ultimately St. Paul that builds the Christian church, not Jesus.
There's a great book on that, the Gnostic Gospels you should look at. Why they were so against Gnosticism. Because, didn't want the hierarchy that the apostolic church was building.
It's a paradox, for instance, that in order for us to be treated the way we are treated, these other people have to be crazy. They have to be ill. But it's interesting, though, these are the very people who many of us want to imitate and whose behavior is held up as normal and whose physiognomy and the whole thing. We overlook the fact that you look at the condition the world is in, it's a state of suicide as it is today, where people are really being misused and exploited and abused. We look at our own history and such, and yet at the end of that point, we do not see these people as ill, you see. But we can only be in the condition we're in, particularly talking about African Americans, as a result of the fact that these people were crazy and the craziness has been transferred on to us. But what we're looking at, again, when you talk about feelings, is to escape the effects of craziness, not the craziness itself. And this is a part of the neurosis of many people, you see. So the idea is we don't want to get rid of the madness that their whole ideology and orientation toward life represents. And we can't see the end point, the concrete end point of their whole way of being. All we are really concerned with is getting over the pain, you see. And we figured then if we can identify with them, we will be relieved of the pain. And so even though so let's say that's accomplished. So what we do then is identify with someone who's crazy and sick. So you have two sick, crazy people who are not suffering, but who ultimately, because of their craziness and sickness, will ultimately destroy themselves. You see, so you don't escape. Look at these people whose craziness has led them to the point where they have the world now at the point of total destruction. Instead of us saying, let's get rid of that kind of mind that produces these kind of weapons, that holds the world under this kind of threat, we want to just identify with the total thing. You see, now we will stop suffering pain for a while, but the ultimate outcome is death to everyone. Because that state of mind that's producing that death weapon is ultimately going to destroy itself. So, and it's the same thing with the drug, you see. We escape the pain with the drug, only ultimately to be what? Destroyed by it. You see? And this is the issue that we're getting at. So we have to recognize that getting out of this insanity means going almost the opposite of the way these people are going. Not identifying with them, but disidentifying with them. Now the problem with that is that causes us a little more pain. You see? And it's this unwillingness to accept the pain of this disidentification that keeps us locked in. If we don't go with it, we won't get a job. You know, and that's that thing that got us in. We're caught. And this is where the spirituality comes in, you see. This is where a real self-concept comes in that permits one to bear the pain and the suffering of disengaging from this madness until they can get the upper hand in the world and bring about a different world and accept the consequences of getting out of the madness. But you see, true education would prepare you for that. But there's nowhere in this college that you're going to be prepared to take the kind of suffering and pain necessary to get these people off our backs. You see? You're going to get a whole lot of knowledge, but you're not going to get taught a spirituality and a sense of self that is going to permit you to suffer. In fact, we've reached a point in this country where we believe that it is our inherent right not to suffer, to the point where we think that we shouldn't have to suffer at all. And when you get that belief, it's going to drive you right to drugs. Because it's no accident that these drugs are painkillers. You see? And so when we feel like when you don't train people how to suffer a bit and how to put up with suffering majestically, then you open them up to drugs and any other reliever, which of course ultimately is death, even though they think they're going to die the other way. You see? And you're not going to get that in a college. You can't afford to get it, because to do that would release you from the people who have control of you. You see, spirituality is moved out of the university. And it's deliberately moved out. I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about churchiness, you see. But I'm talking about experiences that allows you to, you see, there must be a time when you can shed all ideologies for a moment and get your own clear vision of what is real and make that connection. And that's a very difficult thing to do. You know, I often think about, and you see this though in the religious teachings of Jesus, it's very clear there. You remember that verse that says, judge not that you be not judged? I puzzled that thing for a long time. And finally, I got a part of it. I don't have all of it. But I recognize that people are entrapped by their judgments. And I tell people, you know, when you judge something, you put a value on something, you're going to suffer the consequences of having judged it. And, you know, often I talk about this in terms of sex. I said, if you make sex sacred, then you're going to suffer guilt. You know, because as soon as you violate your norm, then you're going to go into guilt state. You're going to go into shame. You're going to go into, you know, a lot of things, not because it itself is guilt or it is itself is shameful. Not at all. It is what it is. It's just what it is. But when you come and put a judgment on it and make it symbolic, then that judgment is going to bounce back on you and do you in. And the problem with many people is, you see, we judge and just lay things on things, and then we suffer. We're victimized by our own judgments. And those judgments make us suffer. Those judgments also make us not see. They make us blind. So we want to train people to be able to at least attain a state of mind where they become purely non-judgmental, not putting any labels on anything. And then they will see the isness of things, and then they will achieve what we call enlightenment, which has to do with clarity of vision. But it takes training to do that. You see, you just can't do that on your own. But many people, you can't do that. Many colleges won't permit you to do that, because once you do that, the state loses control of you. Other people lose control of you. You see? And that's the essence of the whole system, is control over other people. And this is what it's about. So this I don't know how we're going to break this out, but that's the way it goes. What's going on there? The process is because one judges the behavior and suffers the judgment. You see, the other one lets it be what it is, and is clear about what it is, and therefore they don't suffer. But as soon as you start labeling it, then you create what you label it with. And So we don't provide our people with any experiences or times that they can break out of categories and judgmental orientations to allow them to have a direct confrontation with reality, which is a direct confrontation with God and religion and being filled with spirit. You see? And the college can't afford to let you do that. The state can't let you afford to do that. Because once they do that, then they lose control over you. And it's overthrown. It's overthrown.
Let me ask you a question. You spoke about the systematic brainwashing that occurs as we take these textbooks and absorb all of this information and then categorize it. How would you suggest that we parallel that that education? For example, we were speaking of economics. As far as economics goes, what would you suggest as a parallel to the quote-unquote college economics that you were?
You see, you have to recognize the structure of the American censorship system. So a lot of people, it's amazing, a lot of us, even as blacks, believe that we don't have censorship in this country. And of course, that's a great illusion. We look at Russia as being censored. Yet when we look at the history of black people, we can see a complete history of censorship, writing black people out of history and the whole bit. But because we don't have a censorship board or some group that's an information officer that stamps things forbidden, we assume that there is not censorship in this country. But what you have to recognize is that the American marketplace itself is the censoring system. So when a textbook publisher, for instance, writes a book, he's going to ask himself the question, of course, will this book sell? So you're writing books for schools. Now, if that book has too much black history in it, if it talks too much reality, no school system is going to pick it. Okay? And so you voluntarily censor the book in terms of economics. And you may not see yourself as censoring, but and you say, well, the bottom line is, will it sell? And if I write black people in history, it's not going to sell. If I write about these thieves down in City Hall, it's not going to sell. If I write really what happens on Wall Street, it's not going to sell, you see. Then you have to write a book that does not offend anyone. And of course, once you write a book that does not offend anyone, then you're writing a book that's essentially deceptive at best, you see, and neutral at best. Now, that neutrality does not injure the people in power, even though it makes them ignorant too, and it maintains their ignorance. It really robs the people out of power, because I tell people there are two educational systems, a formal system and an informal system. You're in the formal one here, and in a sense you can be deceived here as long as you're accepted into the informal one where you really learn the ropes. You see, but when you're given just this formal education and you're kept out of the real end jobs where you really know what's going on, the really happening jobs which we are kept out of, then this more and more of this education is not going to help you out, because it is not going to tell you what's real. At all, you see. And this is the reason why I tell people there's no such thing as an equality of education between blacks and white students in schools. That assumes that all education takes place where? In the school. And that the most important education takes place where? In the school. You see. And so if you can teach a black child exactly the same thing you teach a white child in school, and yet ultimately there's no what? Equality of education there. At all, you see, because the real education, the important education, is outside. So these books are written in a neutral fashion, which means then that they rob you of reality as a black student. And for instance, I give an example I always give about this rat in the box. And then when they talk about Skinner's rat in psychology, I know you've taken that course, right? And they have the rat in the box, and they feed that rat, when they feel like it, according to what they want the rat to do. And I said, you can leave it at that, right? And but if you leave it at that, you can learn the same thing that the white person learns. And you say you have an equal education. Except, I say, when you don't learn that we are the rat. You see, and it is that added dimension that really makes it important to you. And then when you look at that situation, you got to compare that situation to the ghetto, which is a condition. And notice the thing is called conditioning. And I try to get messages to understand that there are different levels of conditioning. That means to live under a certain state. That's also to live on a condition that says, if you lift your left paw, then you get food. That's also conditional as well. So as a result of living under a certain condition, the rat is living in a specific situation. And as a result of having his behavior being based on a condition, you will get fed if you touch this bar. It then comes out with a behavior that it did not have before. Now, you can lead many of our people at that point. But then you got to go and say, wait, okay, now let's look at, say, the ghetto. Look at the conditions of the ghetto. Poor schools, we hear all of that every day. That condition, if that condition of a rat in a box is reflected in this behavior, then the conditions that we live under must also be what? Reflected in our behavior. We not only live in a condition, the condition lives in us. And it's what we call our personality often is but our unique way of expressing our social experience. In a sense, our conditions speak through our mouths. The people we live around, their voice comes through us when we talk. The people we live around, the way they walk, they literally, the culture and conditions we live under literally possess our body. You see, and walks it and talks it. You know what I mean? And we don't realize how very deeply, and to talk about ourselves as being unique individuals, that's a whole other problem there. Okay, so what I'm saying then is, you got to then ask yourself, when I look at this rat and this experiment as a political situation, why is this experimenter able to do this to this rat? Because there's a power relationship. He has the what? Power to do so. He can tell when he can feed that rat when he wants to. He can shock that rat when he wants to. The whole bit. And it's his power to do this that gives him the power then to manipulate and create behavior in that rat. I said, now look at your own behavior. Where did your water come from? Who has control of your water? Who has control of your electricity? Who has control of your gas? Who has control of your food? Who has control of the charge? And when you look that thing up, and who is going to turn these things on and off, depending on how you behave. You see? Now, if you leave that out in the psych course, you have miseducated black students. You have not made, because many of them, because of their prior training, miseducation, will not be able to read into that rat and reach the further conclusion. You have to literally tell them the conclusion. After you tell them that a few times, then they will start what? Looking and seeing. You see? And therefore, so when you go into economics class, these people are not concerned with solving your economic problems. They're concerned with solving their own. They are concerned with describing and predicting their own system. And they are concerned with creating people and personalities and professionals who can make their system work and advance it, in that sense. So consequently, what is important to you is going to be almost completely left out or coincidental to the system. And if you spend all of your time and energy learning that, it means then that you're going to crowd out anything related to yourself. And then when on top of that you believe that what they're saying is universal, and more important than anything else, you're not going to even take the time to learn about the other kinds of situations, you see. So then, consequently, even though when you come out with the full degree, because of your training and because the training has been designed for their system, you will only be able to use that training often within that system. And when you come outside of that system, even with the best intentions and love you have for your people, you're often going to bungle it and mess it up. You see, and not because you're vicious or mean or greedy. You can feel with love and still mess it up because you're still operating on the wrong foundation of knowledge. You see, and this is the thing. This is why, again, I said earlier, despite all the degrees we get, we still are losing economic control of all of it, the whole bit. And that's because you can get black economists, and we are puzzled about how in the heck we can get control of all of it. And yet, if you get them talking about international economics, they can wax all night long. Now, what does that mean for you then? It means that as a student in this school, and in any school, while you read the materials that these people make available to you because it helps you understand their system, and because they're related to you, it's going to help you to a degree to even understand your own. Because to a good degree, what their system is creates what our system is. So you cannot afford to neglect this. But in addition to that, and this is the parallel you got to look at, in what way does this system create the problems in mine? Okay? And you have to constantly ask yourself that question. So you have to keep that question in mind. In what way can I apply this piece of information to my situation? In what way does this concept explain or does not explain what I am about? And this is where you begin to, and as you struggle with it, you begin to really build up a knowledge and a foundation of knowledge for yourself. Read the books that they do not recommend. You see, that are not put on the reading list. Because often they are not put on the reading list just because by being put on the reading list, getting to know them will undermine what they are about. Because they have a fear of them. You see, that's why I read about the Moonies in psychology. I read the psychology of brainwashing and so forth. Because you see, why are these people frightened of the Moonies? They recognize that when you train people into a basic set of values and make them loyal to something other than this system, they lose control over them. And they reckon they want to be the only ones who are able to use brainwashing. You see, and consequently then, brainwashing is going to be given a negative name. The groups that use it will be given a negative image so that you will refuse to read about what they're doing. But there's a very interesting question there that I ask in writing my book. How is it that the Moonies can transform a personality in 2 or 3 weeks? Now that is a very important question to me, because it also says if these people can transform a personality at that time, then why can't I use the same techniques for what? For transforming what? My people into our interests. You see, but when you let another people keep that kind of reading off the list, and when you let them put a wholesale negative evaluation on it, then that means you will never get the answer to the question that you need to do what you're supposed to do. So don't just stick with the list. Go off the list. Read the unpopular books. Read the leftist literature. You see? Read the other black literature, even though it's not on there. You gotta read it. Read it during the summer. This is how you supplement that education. Ask different questions. Even when they talk about money, for instance, how do you get money to start a business? Now, you know realistically that we're not going to get money from banks. Then you say, well, now that system is not going to work for me. But then you still have the issue of how can we raise money in the black community? Then you start asking the issue, where is the money in the black community? Okay? Then you might reach the point that, well, the money essentially is in organizations. Church being the major one. Then it makes you start looking at religion. Should the church only be defined as a religious institution? Can it be defined as an economic institution? You see, you begin to, now you're beginning to move into a whole different thing here. And now then, how can the money that's available to the church, that's available to black organizations in various forms, be used and put out in such a way that it can be utilized by the black community, you see? Now, you're still in your course, but you are taking the questions and issues of that course, and by projecting them into your own culture, you're beginning to arrive at the kind of answers you need. Then you can begin to read literature related to it. Also, when you read other materials, read them not just for what they say, read them with your basic questions in mind. For instance, I always recommend this book by Ivan Light. I was mentioning it to some groups out there, where he talks about Father Divine. Now, you can look at Father Divine as a cult leader, but you can also look at these leaders as having an ability to raise money, having an ability to get large sums of money, to build large institutions with those money, churches, to buy apartment buildings with those monies, to open businesses with those monies, and this is what they did now. And now, so your idea is not to read him to condemn him as some occult leader, but to read the psychology of this man and say, how was this man able, in contrast to Afro-American aid? That leads you back to an old economic system based in Africa. How is it that the Chinese and Japanese are able to accomplish what they accomplish? Now you look at it again in terms of, you notice it's what? The social organization between those people and social relationship. This is where you begin to move into knowledge.
And on that particular thing, a lot of the economic systems that have been built have been based around religious, like Father Divine, based around some spiritualism.
Right.
Do you think there's a foundation upon which an economic system can be based, similar to those, where there's a cooperative effort on the parts of the members involved without that spirituality?
Yeah, that's an issue I wrestle with all the time. Can you come outside of that organization? I think you can. But you have to found. Usually, though, there has to be some kind of ideology, which is what religion is about ultimately, and some kind of overall concept. I think it can be done, and it's an issue that I haven't resolved, so I'm still working with it. But I think I don't think you have to do it. I mean, one way I'm looking at it is, can I provide within a secular context the kind of human emotional feelings that a religion usually gives people, such that people will tend to maintain loyalty as such. I've often said, if we say that part of our problem is we don't trust each other, or we have problems maintaining cordiality with each other in company, then I think a part of the solution would be to provide deliberate psychological situations where this kind of trust must be generated and must be created, so that people can actually live in a trustworthy relationship with each other. The other approach I've also tried to use is this. If you can demonstrate as a nationalist that your ideology actually pays off, then people will also follow it. Now, one of the reasons why I founded my business over there, and it's very important that I succeed, I want people to know, when they go in that business, when you come into my business there, you see that it's very African, and you see African images all over it, right? And the thing that I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the making of money and economics does not have to be separated and alienated from the culture. As a matter of fact, they must go together. But the other thing that I'm trying to illustrate is that nationalist ideology does not mean that you're choosing poverty. That it goes ultimately into concrete kinds of things. And so if you can get a group of people who have a very firm ideology, and you begin to really create concrete institutions that demonstrate concrete results, people will then move toward you because they see being with you as being a rewarding experience. And in that instance, you can even create a secular situation. Of course, the other thing to do is to educate your people, you see, in the way you want them to be educated. I'm going to be, in a few weeks, I will start educational programs in there, you see, and we'll begin to then create the kind of people I would like in a secular situation, you see. And so I've suggested often that we train trainers. We should get together, indoctrinate the people into the ideology, build their loyalty through emotional connections and relationships, and this way, and then of course send them out to train and indoctrinate further people. Now, it's a difficult work, but it can be done, and it has to be done.
This is a business or organization
I have a business over there. Of course, it's a business organization. And it's a business organization that's the result, and I often tell people when I opened it, I had no money, I was unemployed. Again, and I didn't go to banks, a small business thing to get it. How did I do it? I did it the way all the other people in the world do. The thing that I try to get across first in understanding is that you cannot have an economy except you have a network of social relations first. See, a lot of people try to go the other way around. They try to build an economic system without having a social infrastructure. You must have a very definite set of social relationships between people. An economic system cannot work without social organization and without people relating to each other in a very definite sort of way, speaking the same language, having similar values, similar ideologies, and once you get that, then out of that grows an economic system. You see, you can only build an economic system out of that. One of the major problems you see in black economics is that we've sought to build economic institutions without building the foundational social relationships and ideologies, which forces you then into individual capitalism and, of course, ultimately forces us into failure. And it forces us to be unsupported in our business ventures, and the very failures themselves then create the image of inferiority in black people. And so when I went into the business, I was basically without a job, and I'm still really essentially unemployed now. But yet I indicated that we must invest basically from $60,000 to $200,000 in that business. How was I able to do that without a nickel in my pocket? Through social friends, through a network of friends, through people who had a little money here and had faith in me, who had a relationship with me, who had faith in a relationship with each other, and who then with that faith and with that set of social relations and with the little money that they had, then pooled that money to build that kind of institution over there, that we are in the process of building. Is that something new? Not at all. That's been the foundation of all the building of people. When you look at West Indian economic behavior, look at Japanese economic behavior, Chinese, Korean economic behavior, you see the same thing going on. But you see, the European knew that we could not build an economic system as long as we did not trust each other. As long as we were unreliable and undependable in relationship with each other. As long as we were suspicious of each other. As long as we could not come under the authority of each other to some degree so that we can get something done. And this is why then we are robbed of these characteristics. You see, we are the ultimate individualists. You see? And so he taught us this individualistic psychology. And in these kind of educational institutions, from secondary school on, there is no room for these characters to be rebuilt into the black personality. You see? Everything is placed on ABCs and academics. You can do that when you have an overall uniting ideology. Once you, and see, the European can take his united ideology for granted. Therefore, he doesn't have to teach it in the college and in the secondary school. All he has to teach is what? ABCs. You see? But for people who have been deliberately robbed of their thinking skills and deliberately robbed of these other characteristics, then your education should first be one that builds these what? Things back in. Then after you build them back in, then you do what? Teach the ABCs and the other stuff. Then that leads to a building of economic, social, political organizations, and you move on that. But again, you get the backward thing. You say, what is going on in these institutions is they're trying to teach us the ABCs first, and we are so psychologically alienated and destroyed Until we end up not learning ABCs, nor learning how to get along with each other. And that's the error, you see. And it goes right on up to higher education, you see. And that's why you have to first study your people, understand them very, very well, and understand the system very, very well, and then found the system of education on that. This is what I mean again by being miseducated. What is missing in black children when they come to school? What kind of personality do they generally have as a result of being so-called black in America? Then, what kind of curricula can we establish that speaks to that issue? And so, therefore, a cultural understanding will literally tell you what kind of educational system you must establish. But if you look at another people and take their system and impose it on yours, then you're going to miseducate them. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. So when you start your analysis and understanding, and then you start educating people, your own people in your own group, in terms of that, then you start producing the kind of people you need to advance the interests. And when you get ready to go into economic establishments, the first thing you see about often is not the money, but the people, the personalities, the ability to work, the faith. And that is what you build up. When you study the Jamaican Susu system, that's a system that's ultimately still based on trust to a good degree. Or you study the Chinese, who had a very similar system. That was a belief. We're from the same village. We have the same last name. Therefore, having this, we vowed, we may betray everybody else, but not between us. You know, and you work that thing up. That's why it's very important now to see, like Sister Donna is into initiation rites. Very important, because it is through rites. A rite is an education, and it is also the provision of experiences, so that when people get through with that education and that experience, they become attached to each other in a way that works for them in many different ways. You see, the thing that used to puzzle me a lot was tribalism in Africa. I know people hate to use that term, but what I always ask myself, how is it that you can build such loyalty into people who obviously are of the same ethnic root, but who can look at each other almost as if they are complete different people? You know, where Yoruba looks at an Igbo like, you know, like we would look at a white person almost, you know, sometimes, you know. And that used to get to me. And to me, that's an important question you need to answer in Hunter College. That's an important question you need to answer in anthropology and answer in psychology. If you're not answering those questions, you're not solving any problems. What is the psychology such that you get these people who will literally destroy each other and have a hell of a time putting the nation together? How is it that kind of loyalty is built into each of those groups like that? And a part of my looking at that question made me look at initiation, see, and training. How is it that these Africans can train that kind of intense loyalty such that the person is identified more by his tribe than he is by his individual person? And once I understand that psychology, then of course I began to say, how can I provide the same kind of experiences or similar experience in education such that the African American can be more identified with African Americans than he can even with himself as an individual. And the psychology is there. It's right there. Then the issue becomes, how can I get a school or facility so that these experiences can be created and worked out and that loyalty brought about. So, and then from that you can build economic institutions. You know, I want to ask one quick question. I left my old coat upstairs. I believe I left it in that room upstairs. Yes, let me see. No, that's no. You see it with a black scarf around it. Is where I laid it when I first walked into the room.
question. What
Yeah.
what specifically is the business related to?
we have a printing, copy shop, stationery, and art shop over there. So of course, we do printing and copying. Oh, and we sell books. We're building up a bookstore there. And of course, we sell popular art. It's not heavy art, but images that people can buy for $3-4, and so that we can spread the culture. One thing about it, when you look at European culture, that culture is basically spread through economic activity, not through lecturing the whole lot, but through through economics. And it's European economic activity that's really the vehicle of European cultural imperialism. And note now to what degree people are going to get into Japanese culture as a result of Japanese economic activity, not because a bunch of Japanese are running around lecturing people on what it means to be Japanese. Now people will learn to speak Japanese because of, and that's what language, there's no such thing as a good language or a bad language. Language is related to power. Whatever group is in power, that's the language you learn. And so if we were in power, people would be learning black English. There's nothing wrong with black English, you see. And you notice as countries increase in power, their language becomes in demand. More people learn that language. And as they decrease in power, fewer people learn the language. And if they completely cease to have power, that language dies with them. The whole thing, as I said upstairs, when I first started at college, people were still into German. I could see, back before it was German. But Germany lost power and position in the world. And then Russia came up with Sputnik, and all of a sudden they had Russian classes all over the place, And notice, even when we thought we were going to get black power, how many African courses started coming into being, you see. And so, but what is this the result of? It's the result of economic activities. If we are concerned with the spread of African culture, we have to be concerned with the spread of African economics. So when what I sell in there is African art, African images, as a part of my economic activity. But as I sell it, people buy it, they put it up in their houses, they begin to, without me preaching to them at all, they begin to inculcate the Afrocentricity. They come in there, they see that there's money, that there's activity, that services are provided, and it's not a neutral image, it's not that music being played in the place, but black music, jazz, people there, and therefore they get at it, they disabuse themselves of the idea that they have to lose their identity in order to make money, you see. Then if I sell more African wares in that shop, I have some dashikis over there, I have, a little bit of this, and it's still growing. We're not where we should be, but we're not a full store, we're still growing. But if I buy those products, I have a gentleman from the from the Nigerian consulate here. Now he's buying supplies from Nigeria. Now if I can sell those supplies, I'm not only spreading African culture among the people who buy it, but I also happen to support economically African people who are making those products in Nigeria, in Kenya, and other places. So my position here then is one that begins to move African culture and develop African culture as a whole. And as we become more economically powerful, we become more culturally powerful as well. And that's why I said earlier, even with the ideology, people begin to see your ideology paying off. What do I try to create in my shop? I try to create an atmosphere such that when people come into that shop, they feel good. And how do I try to make them feel good? I try to make them look good. I project those black books up there that many haven't seen before. And it startles some of them. I didn't know that was this much. They see those black images up there, they look good and they look nice. I try to get my staff to act correctly so that you have people who really like to hang around sometimes. They just want to hang around. We don't push them out, and because that's a part of the process. I want them, what did I say earlier about people defining things in terms of their feeling? I want them to begin to feel good being in their own businesses and being around themselves. So ultimately they begin to say, hey, if I'm to feel good, I need to be with and around my people. And again, the culture, nobody's lecturing. You see? Yeah, but it's moving. And this is why, again, I used to tell even people sometimes at first world and other people, look, if you ultimately want to influence your people, you must influence their concrete existence. And that means, and you can lecture to people all you want to, but when they walk out of this lecture hall and find Harlem owned by Koreans, they're going to negate what you're saying. It's going to negate it. The people who need to hear your lecture most are not going to even come. You have to meet them where they are, on the streets. And therefore, when they see those stores down there owned by black people, you don't have to say one word to them. They know you're great. You know what I mean? It's there. The white man doesn't spend all his time lecturing to his children about how great they were or how great they are. The very greatness of the people is projected in their very way of life. They see that they're the bosses. I mean, you don't have to tell them they're the bosses. It's there. And so what you ultimately, the ultimate transformer of people then is to provide them with a concrete experience. And that concrete experience transforms them very subtly. You know, my little boy would ask, well, why are all the Koreans on the store? That's a very difficult question to deal with when you try to tell them how great you are. You know what I mean? And he's going to say, well, you know, if you're so great, why don't you have something? We must not be so great. We don't have anything. And when you lecture, and when you start lecturing them, it'll look like you're really just trying to make excuses and you're really not telling the truth. And there's something wrong. Even though they can't think of it clearly, they sense there's something wrong with the whole idea. So I'm now for organizations and people who, in addition, and I use that word addition, to lecturing, are concretely building institutions and influencing the people that way instead of just the other way. One other thing I want to say on this economic thing, black nationalists in particular, and people who get into Afrocentrism, get into traps. They often confuse nationalism with an attitude. You know, I'm nationalist because I hate white folk. I'm nationalist because I want to sleep with white women. You know, that kind of negative definition of self. I'm nationalist because I wear African clothes. You see, I'm nationalist because I read nothing but black history. You know, you have a lot of people who have that kind of, what I call a pseudo-nationalism, because it's sort of a negative definition, and it's an attitude, because often when you see people define it, and they know a lot of history, in fact, they become obsessed with Egyptian history, they become obsessed with, African history, and they just, every waking hour is into it, right? Except that they never get around to doing anything real. And you'll see sometimes the places that are lecturing most about Eurocentrism, and lecturing most about Africa, and the most about Egypt, hasn't built one institution. Hasn't built one. They have criticized Eurocentric education and have not built one school for black children. They have criticized European economic exploitation, has not built one business at all, has not built one housing project at all. But they fly to Egypt and spend $500,000.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. When you're asking people to pay $1,500 to go to Egypt, and you got 200 people, you know what you're talking about there? And when you count what they spend before they go, and what they spend when they are there, do you know you're talking about $500,000? And yet these same people stay in a rented church where other people control the lights, and yet these same people cannot support a school even though they criticize Eurocentric education. Yet they can't build a college or a university, yet they handing out $1 million or more each summer to Arabs and to Pan Am and to the other groups. You understand what I'm saying? That's the danger of people becoming obsessed in this way and in a sense not. So this issue isn't confronted because they will not confront what is the place of money in the world. In African society. They won't deal with that. And you notice they never have any economists lecturing up there. There's always historians, a psychologist or somebody. Note they won't face the issue of voting. Where does voting fit within the black community? New York City is majority black and Hispanic. New York City and politics is about money. and how you move money around. The Board of Education has $5 billion. Commissioner Golden sits over $30 billion of pension funds. Billions of dollars are down there in New York City just going past black people, because you got a bunch of black people who don't see the relationship between voting and electing to office and the control of income. And when you have a nationalist group, well, that's the system. I'm not going to get a part of that. I'm going to stay away from voting. I'm going to stay away from politics. I got a hands off. Then this is a group that, again, you will see, even though it talks a lot of history and does a lot of teaching, has absolutely no real influence in the concrete life of black people. They cannot take those millions at expense for a psychological thing to build housing and to show in a concrete fashion. If you believe in an African ideology, it'll get you a better house. You see, if you believe in the African ideology, it'll conduit that money from the Board of Education into your neighborhood, you see. If you believe in an African ideology, you see, you don't have to beg for jobs, because what about the issue of investing in Con Ed? Does it mean if we invest, we don't have to beg for the job because we have a part of it, we can demand these jobs? Does it mean that if we enter into certain institutions, we can direct those institutions so that their money can be spent in trade with Africa, and therefore we lift the trade with Africa? Does it mean that the American black man is in a very crucial position in this country, that if he fully and aggressively became a part of the economy, not because he's some kind of capitalist, but because in getting a hand on this economy, he can begin to conduit the use of that money and lead to greater exports from Africa and Caribbean countries and other kind of countries, and therefore instead of this hands-off attitude that I'm not going to have anything to do with money, and I'm not going to have anything to do with voting, I'm not going to have anything, so that in the end, Africa continues to suffer, we continue to suffer, and so forth. What I'm saying here then is you have to confront those issues, work those issues through, and turn them ultimately into something concrete so that it can work. And that's where you get to real education. Can't you begin to see now where black education is so fundamentally different and has a different orientation from the kind of education you get in these standard schools? Because you have terribly different issues. You have a terribly different psychology. You go into marketing class. How do you get a Negro in marketing who has been taught that anything white is better, who's been made to feel good when he buys something from Bloomingdale's, because of that whole connection there? How do you build an ad campaign that you can get this kind of customer? Because this is the kind of customer you got to pull back if you're going to win them. You're going to win them at all. But if you're not going to deal with that in your marketing class, your marketing class is going to say, how can you get a Dwight Gooden or a basketball player to drink Coca-Cola in such a way that more black people will drink Coca-Cola? You see? And when you learn that well, you're going to get hired on that basis. That says, now I know how to sell my people more of your product. But you won't be taught, how do you get black people to take over to Coca-Cola subsidiaries? How can black organizations or church groups or other kind of groups organize them in such a way that if our kids are going to buy this stuff, we can own some of it? If that's not being addressed in your marketing class, then you're being miseducated, you see. You're not being dealt with. How can the black economic organization, how can blacks build an economic network? Now, blacks have a system of churches across the country. Can that system of churches be organized in such a way that these churches can organize black communities, organize black economic system, so that you have a national system set up? Then, once you have a national system set up, you have a basis then for manufacture, because you have a market to sell to, and now you can build a transportation system up, and you can work on and on from that. If you don't confront that issue in your marketing class, you're not confronting reality, you see. And unless you do this outside on your own, you're not confronting it, you see. And this is the kind of thing. Now, if you can't confront it in class, then you have to organize some groups of your people in that class, one or two people, even one other person that you know in that class that you can talk to outside of yourself, outside of class, to work on these particular issues, you see. You can write papers, if it's permitted, on that particular issue. You can form your economic clubs, your black economic clubs, just not the club built around history and so forth, but clubs built around your particular professions. If you're into computer engineering, how can we build a consulting firm such that it can serve this and that. These are the kind of issues and things you confront. Yes, you want someone?
Yeah, but you said something was working for the people, for the Yoruba people, so that they looked at the Igbo people as like they were a white person. But then that thing that's working for them stops working the minute that they have to deal with a European.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they... So what it is, it's got to be something more than just...
Well, it's the psychology. It's essentially the same kind of psychology that's based pretty much on the conditioned paradigm of rewards and punishment. It's also based on experiences. All of them have experienced rewards and punishments in relationship to the European, and they all have come to realize that the European has a greater power to reward and punish, even than they have in terms of each other. And therefore it becomes more in their interest to you see. So while they have their internal problems and issues between themselves, to a good extent, those issues are superseded in all of them by their relationship to the European. It's like sibling rivalry in a family. While fights goes on between sisters and brothers, ultimately it's the parent who must be related to by all. And while all of them may relate to the parents in a certain sort of way, they are compelled, that relationship often supersedes their own relationship with each other because of the power structure that's set there, you see. And often even the European power structure feeds into the rivalry. Of course, we know when you read the history of slavery, that rivalry was in part a basis for the slave trade, you see. So to a good degree, the Europeans may help to even maintain the rivalry as a way of maintaining their own power relationship. If it rewards one group in relationship to the other, you see, it maintains that. If one group is in power in the government, and through maintaining a special relationship with the European, then of course that relationship is more important to it in maintaining its power over the other group than getting harmony with the other group. And for the other group, it's a greater interest to gain favor of the European group so they can gain power over the other group. You see, so they're going to always have a different kind of relationship to the European than they will to themselves, because that relationship to the European represents a certain power in relationship to each other. You see. May I have that phone? Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found it. Go ahead.
The reason why I asked, because you mentioned, for example, like Ghana was doing a rites of passage, so to create a bond between us. So is there a chance of that ever happening if we have this European dividing us?
Oh, yes. Yes, there's always, yes. We do it within our institution. She did it, right? Yeah, she was able to do it because the European cannot be what? Everywhere all the time. But then you look at the so-called Mau Mau, they did it right in the face of what? Of colonialism and oppression, you see. In fact, that's the time to do it. It becomes even more effective under oppression, particularly where the oppression is brutal and straightforward. As a matter of fact, as a part of brainwashing is to create, to a degree, you don't have to do this under all circumstances by any means, but in many instances, the outside group is made to appear to be more threatening than it is, or to be described as the more threatened and the more realistic the group sees the threat, the more it is motivated to become cohesive within itself. You see, a part about my problem and people out here who are trying to deal with our situation is it's difficult to get across to our people that our lives are really threatened. You see? And therefore, we feel as if we are not really threatened, if these people really wouldn't put us in these gas ovens. You see? That they, even though they may hang us every now and then, or they may do a Howard Beach, and we can say, well, that's an individual thing, so forth. It's difficult to motivate people to come together. You notice You essentially can only motivate our people to come together around these kind of issues. You know, Howard Beach is shot over here on 125th, then you get a mass meeting. But it's difficult to call a mass meeting when you don't have that kind of event. You see what I'm saying? To bring and motivate people to come together. So what the good brainwasher does is to create that kind of sense. You see, to create the motive. And then, once he brings them together, he creates the experience. You see? And he interprets the information. You see? And he excludes certain kind of information. Let's say it like it is. This is the way it works, you know. And therefore builds a new group and builds new personalities into that group. And this can be done. It can be done right in this country, right? And this is why I often advise many of our people that many of our organizations should be secret organizations. We have too many public organizations. We have too many public people. The people who really run this country, you've never have heard of them. You'd be shocked at the number of secret. The thing that I find very interesting in the Reagan scandal is not the scandal whether Reagan broke the law, but read that Colonel North system, how he has all of these organizations hooked up, all the way down to death squads, and organizations you have never heard of in your life. They are networked together, and they were about to carry out a whole foreign policy and a whole program completely outside of the government, period. And they were able to do that because nobody really was aware of their existence, you see. And to me, when I read the accounts, what I'm looking at is how these people have built these organizations. I heard of an organization, how many people heard of the Triad Society? An old organization, an old Oriental Chinese organization that's been around for a long time. Sort of a secret. The old smugglers organization, drug system, it's just now beginning to, you hear a little bit about it in this country, but it's been around a long time. It's been manipulating drugs and money and gold and jewels from way back, you see. And they're able to do it. How many people are familiar with the Council on Foreign Relations? That's an organization out of which the larger percentage of U.S. presidents have come. Almost every Secretary of State and Defense have come out of that organization. That's an organization of a lot of millionaires and top-notch people in governments. And they literally direct policy in this country. People don't know about them. See, a lot of the people on the board, people don't even know. But these are the people that are calling the shots and who are determining policy and orientation, you see. And because of they're relatively unknown and their groups are relatively unwatched, they're able to shape and mold policy. A lot of people talk to me over there, about, wow, why don't you project yourself? I said, no, I really don't want to project myself because it would be easier for us to take over Harlem if we were unknown than if we were known. You should buy up this property secretly, because the instant people recognize that you're buying the property there publicly, they're going to eat you up. They're going to block you out. And therefore, you and see, this is the other thing, you have to have people who are willing to die without fame. You see, but if you got people who are caught up egotistically, they gotta be known, they gotta be seen. And you see a leader, someone who must be, often what you do, you put a leader up there and let him just keep up all the noise and be the target, while the real people are doing something else. You see, that's why I tell people, let the Jesse Jacksons stay up there. They serve a good thing. Let the people deal with them and focus on them. But the real people should be doing what's necessary to be done. Buying up the real estate, getting into the economy, worming their ways into places that people don't even know where they are. Why do you join the Masons? You got Masons all over the place. No one knows who they are. They do, though. And they were able to sit on judges' benches, they're able to sit in political office, and all they got to do is flash a little ring and make a little signal, and what? Zip. They get breaks. Because, what? They know each other, and they have the thing of secrecy. So why can't we then form these kind of organizations where even a person who may appear to be establishment black to the outside world is really sitting in the position to manipulate things in a way that works to the benefit of his organization and his group. And he's willing sometimes to even take the flack of that image, if necessary, to accomplish what is there, you see. And you can see again in the African societies, in these so-called tribal groups, what? Many sub-societies and fraternities operating within the group itself. You see, now we haven't studied this, and this is why, again, in your sociology class, you don't just study that old crazy group behavior that they talk about all the time. They're going to talk about that superficial stuff. Take our time to read books on secret societies, Masons, and initiation groups, and other kind of groups, because these are the real game. Take our time to read those books on who really rules America, and those kind of books that are kind of pushed to the side and not dealt with. Because this is where you get the information about how to manipulate and run systems, you see. Study the literature on brainwashing in concentration camps, because the plantation was a concentration camp. And once you understand that, then you can understand how to transform people. Study how the African personality itself was transformed from an African into a servant personality. What was the psychology? How was this able to be accomplished? You can see then there what? The control of information, as I said, the control of definition, the control of education, right? The control of experience. You see, when you raise your children, you even tell them how they should feel. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should feel good. You should be proud. And what are we doing? We're actually telling them what kind of emotional experience they should have. You see? Then when you see the principle is the same everywhere then if you want to change your own personality, then you recognize you got to get control of information, you got to get control of definition, which is what all brainwashing groups do, right? Get control of experience, control the experience that the people will have with each other and with the outside world and perception and so forth. Control economically. That's why some groups will tell you, give up all your money when you come in here, right? Which is another way of what? Attaching the individual and committing the individual to the group. And one of the cults use that all the time. When you come in, you give everything you got up to the, and man, if you give all that, you know you're going to hang in there. These are methods and techniques that we need to study and look at. And they are techniques and methods that have been used in all societies and groups. It's good to look at the society itself as a brainwashing group. You see, because often you see in the sociology classes isn't dealt that way, because everybody wanted to make it appear that society doesn't brainwash. But brainwashing is a technique, and it is neither negative nor positive. It's a methodology by which characters are created in people. And every society creates characters. It has to. It's not a society that doesn't create personalities and create people for special roles. But instead of being taught it that way in your sociology classes and psychology classes, it's taught on some kind of level that never permits you to really see what the game is all about. You see? So that's why you have to read outside and read very popular books, on the outside. Read books on Chinese propaganda. Propaganda is another word that's made to be negative. And therefore, we don't get into the psychology of propaganda. Myth is another word that's made to appear to be negative. So when somebody says, well, it's a myth, we threw with it right there. Oh, no. It was not important whether when Elijah Muhammad said that the white man was a devil, whether the white man was a devil or not. Now some academic types will debate that. Well, not all white people are devils. I know some good white folk, and I know some bad white folk. But notice now, when I was growing up south, it didn't matter how well educated my people were and so forth. All black people rode on the back of the bus, I'm telling you. These people didn't make differentiations, not important ones, when it came to protecting their system. They made a blanket, stereotypical, even in their hearts they might have known better, but that didn't change the rule. You black, you sit here. You black, you can't come here. And you can say, well, but I'm educated, I'm this and that. I don't care. In fact, I want you most of all to say. What is going on here? That these white people were too foolish to know that white people were different? No, they're not that foolish. But they know that if they start getting ambivalent and mixed up about it, what's going to happen? Their system is going to collapse because the system is based upon keeping this ideology operating. And when you see the first phase in brainwashing, when you want to break a personality down, break a personality system down, is to create confusion in the personality. Make them begin to question their very basic assumptions first. Make them doubt things that they just thought were true from the very beginning. Once you start getting them to doubt and question something that they have accepted as eternal truth from God himself, then you got them on the run. You can begin to invade the personality then, once you do that, you see. So these people, in order to protect their system, knew that they must not open their mind up to what? Doubt and confusion, you see. And therefore they create a mythology that stereotypically paints all the people, and in that way they protect themselves from doubt and confusion, and that way they can protect the system that they're in. You see, so when Elijah Muhammad says white people are devil, he's not talking about whether that is real in the case. The point is, once you put that myth out of there, what does it do for black people? What does it do if black people were to what? Believe it. Not whether it's true or not. What effect would believing this myth have on their behavior? Would it tend then to separate them from the white man? Would it tend then to make them get a different value system? Would it tend then to move them toward themselves and make them more cohesive one with the other? Would it tend then to make them put down dirty habits and things that are eating up their monies and tearing up their families? Would it tend then to make them spend money with each other, relate to each other? You see, that belief. You see, so that is the point of the mythology, not its truth or untruth, but its pragmatic outcome. You see, but when you get educated in here, they educate you in something called truth. Right? You see, such that when a statement is made by them, you're going to apply their criterion of truth to it, and you're going to enter into doubt and ambivalence. You see, and it's going to keep you open all the time. But it's going to be their criterion set up in what? Their interests, and therefore, and then they're going to make you see myth. So when they label some mythology, you're going to automatically not be interested in it and learn about it. And therefore they're going to label anything a myth that does not what? Fall in line or does not create the kind of behavior that they want. And they will make myths for themselves that will create the kind of behavior they need in their own people. So the ability to create myths, you see, and to create propaganda is a very, very important ability. You should not hesitate to learn what it's about simply because someone makes propaganda a negative word. And this is what I was referring to earlier, when you let other people define for you things, you see, and put values on things, so such that when they do, you have a knee-jerk reaction to jump back. Oh, the Moonists are a cult. Then you stop. You don't want to read about them anymore. But think about the idea that American white society can be looked upon also as a cult. And then begin to analyze this society in terms of a cult. You see, but it isn't done that way. It's seen as a society with norms and folkways and mores. Right? And this is a standard sociological definition. You can look at it that way, but that's nothing that tells you you can't look at it. Well, let me look at it as a cult system. You see? Or like I said about the prison, you can look at the prison as a correction center, a rehabilitation system, but you can also say, well, let me look at it as an industry. You see? And if I impose that model on it, what do I get? You see, as a result thereof. Let me look at the white man as a tribe. You see, let me not only apply the word tribe to what? African people. Let me apply the word to other people and see what that means. And you begin to get a whole different view of the whole psychology of what so-called tribalism is about, and why tribalism should not be restricted to apply to African people, but can be used in various kinds. Then it gives your intellect a whole flexibility, and then you will see a whole creativity growing out of it, you see. And you begin to be loosed from the kind of education that is being imposed on you. And your mind frees itself, and you can see then yourself being able to solve problems and do kind of things like that. So take what they have, but take it and turn it around and twist it and use it in ways that they tell you not to use it, you see. And this is what, you see, a true education would open those kind of possibilities to you. And a black education would open those kind of possibilities, you see. And once you see that, you can see it's very, very different from what we call the standard education, period. Okay, maybe I deal with one other issue, then we can get someone else have a statement or a question.
I have an issue. You're speaking of the conditioning that comes with the sensation of good and not good, and how that enters into relationships, where something that supposedly I forgot. Where you don't take into consideration the consequence of your behavior, and something that is said to be good for you is usually the thing that will be most destructive for you because it feels good to you.
You see, when you look at conditioning, and see, I mean, you know, if I don't watch myself in a psych class, I'll end up one semester teaching one chapter. You know, because, and see, that's the other thing I tell people about education, why black people are destroyed in education, because the time sequence in education has to be based on your culture. How long you stay in class, how long a class should last, should be related to the cultural situation of the people. There's no such thing as a 45-minute course or a 3-hour course. You know, we got all of this nonsense from white folk. But we take that kind of course for granted. You know, a course should last 3 hours and so forth. No. You teach as long as it's necessary to get across what needs to be taught. And I keep telling our people are destroyed by the very time system. Just by the time structure. How can you have a student who you say is half prepared as another student and you give them the same amount of time to learn something? And then you call that equal education because they're sitting in the classroom the same length of time. That's crazy. That's not equal education. But this is the kind of equal education we buy. And you say people come in with lower reading scores, lower math scores, and this and so forth, and then you're giving them an equal education by sitting them into the classroom the same length of time. It's crazy. And teaching them the same thing, and teaching them the same thing you're teaching the more so-called advanced person, and you call that an equal education, it's nonsense. When you look at the concept of equal education, you see it's an empty concept that has no meaning whatsoever at all. And I'm saying that in reference to the conditioning situation and to the one chapter I was talking about, because the chapters are so rich. And with our people, they really need to be bought out and worked, you know. But within the context of the college, you can't work them because you got to move on. You know, you only got 45 minutes, and if you don't cover 10 chapters, you know, you're seen as a terrible person. And of course, you cover 10 chapters, and you leave people with nothing but fragments and pieces of information in their head. You haven't taught them the thing to understand or do anything, and they've almost forgotten that before the course is over. So what do you got there? You know, it's a total waste. Conditioning. Why do you put a Michael Jackson on the TV screen? Because people like Michael. They feel good when they see Michael. They drool, their mouth waters when they see Michael. Just like the Pavlovian dog does. Right? What is Pavlovian conditioning about? It's very simple conditioning. Food is a natural stimulus for salivation. You put food in the mouth, salivation is going to come. Even if you try not to salivate, when something goes in your mouth, it just comes up automatically. You don't have to be taught that. You don't have to be trained. It's there. It's built in by nature, and food is the natural stimulus for salivation. His question was, can I get something else to be the stimulus for salivation? That's not food. How about just a tick-tock on a metronome? Let's see if we make this old dog water at the mouth just hearing the sound. I mean, the dog can't eat sound, can it? But why is the dog mouth going to water then when he hears the sound? He can't eat sound. And at first, when the dog hears the sound, his mouth doesn't water at all, because it has no meaning as far as digestion is concerned. However, if every time you present the food, you also sound the metronome, and over a period of time you keep putting them together, after a while all you got to do is sound the metronome and the water just comes right out. It's just like a person when they hear the dinner bell. They may not even realize they're hungry until they hear the bell ring, stomach starts growling. Oh, I'm hungry. Hunger comes on cue. Their whole digestive system gets ready, just on cue, even though they can't eat the bell. But its relationship with the food now and the fact that it is related to the food, it begins to take power from the food, and that power then is used to initiate a similar reaction to the food. A very simple system. That's what advertising is about. You like Michael? You drool when you see Michael? Then put Michael and Coke together. So when you see Coke now, you begin to get a similar feeling as when you see who? Michael. You think Michael is great? Then Coke must be great because Michael drinks Coke. And if you want to feel great, then what? Drink Coke. You see? And so you got all of these different, and there are all kinds of connections being built right in. I remember Coke was burnt into my consciousness when I grew up as a kid, because Coke was everywhere. There was hardly a store in America that did not have a Coke sign. Coke donated the signs to the stores all over the country. Man, every little country store you see Coca-Cola and the name of the store. They used to come to my school and give out Coca-Cola pencils, even though you could hardly write with them. Anybody remember those old rough Coca-Cola tablets? Very rough paper, that old pulp paper. They used to give it out. They gave out and presented that image to such a degree until Coke became American. And Coke is not only then a drink, it represents America itself. To drink Coke is to be patriotic. And you see what happened when they took that classic Coke off the market? Not only were people who even didn't drink it felt insulted, they felt insulted because Coke is as American as apple pie, and to make Coke disappear was like making America, it was a sign that America was losing power. So Coke is tied into the American image deeply. And to remove Coke was psychologically destructive, just like people identified McDonald's with America. So that no matter where you go, you see a McDonald's, you feel better. Admit it. You feel a certain sense of what? Familiarity. And you can be in the most foreign country in the world, and if you see a McDonald's, you're home. Because at least you know the food, you know. And that's, of course, why the chains always strive to make their foods consistent. You see, to present the same quality and so forth across the world, because once people identify with them, you see, they'll move toward them because of their conditioning as such. And so we get conditioned to these products by always associating them, one thing with the other. The Marlboro man, he's always seen in the presence of Marlboro cigarettes. And therefore manhood and Marlboro become synonymous, one with the other. And when you think about being a man as a teenager, the first thing you think about is getting a cigarette to demonstrate your masculinity. Even though logically they have nothing to do with each other, right? So then, how do you use this conditioning? So this is what conditioning is about. Now, the person who has power can condition by making certain behavior rewarding and satisfying. Look, old Black Joe, if you do what I tell you to do, and you just call me master, and you call me boss, I'll love you. And he does love the man on a certain level. Yeah, boss, take care of me. Boss, come down to see me when I'm sick. You see, he gets what? Conditioned in that sense. Because he learns that behavior is what? Rewarding. It makes him feel good. He feels accepted. He feels approved. And therefore, he says, but as soon as Joe what? steps out of that role, what happens then? Pain, shock, rejection, threat. And so after a while, Joe is no fool, right? Right? He learns which end is up. That's why I say people are taught to be dumb. Look at sexism. How many women in the past generation were told, you can't be too smart in front of a man? Right? If you act too smart, if you are too aggressive, then the man is going to reject you. If you act too independent, then the man gets jealous and angry. In fact, he'll call you a man. Who's wearing the pants in this relationship? Who's the boss? You're trying to be a man. Because he takes, what, assertiveness, aggressiveness, smartness, independence as what? Masculine traits. He takes dependence, passivity, a little less intelligence as what? Feminine traits. And he subtly and sometimes even consciously punishes you once you step outside of it. When you're subtle and weak, he gets a hard on. Right? He rescues the damsel in distress. But when you're what, aggressive and independent, you just as much a man as I am. Why should I give a hoot about you? You able to take care of yourself. Or he what? If you're going to do that, I'll treat you like a what? A man. You see? And consequently then, many women were conditioned into what? The passive, dependent role because of this situation. And why is she conditioned that way? Through what? Through feeling. Through feeling. You see? And the power that the white man has then is that he can dictate to a good extent what feeling you will experience in relationship to what state of mind you exhibit and what behavior you exhibit. You see? So therefore, if you learn black history, you can find no job. You know, so you stay away from that. If you exert certain behavior, you feel pain, and therefore you tend to move away from that. And so you'll note that anything then that threatens to overthrow the white regime, any behavior, attitude, thought pattern, or so forth, is going to be associated by that system with negative consequences or negative connotations. So consequently, many people will be moved away from it.